Welcome back. This is a continuation of the Star Trek campaign, though you may find that it is becoming more of a story and less of a D6 RPG. I hope you enjoy the story and the direction that we are going. Space: The Final Frontier. These are the Voyages. Season 7, Episode 1, A New Track. Location: Hangar Bay 4, Starbase 12. Time: 6 months post-war. The hangar bay doors of Starbase 12 are wide open to the cosmos, but the space outside looks profoundly different. The heavy, suffocating dread of the hive is gone. In its place is the bustling, chaotic, and heavily armed reality of the Kythera-Mauritanian Accords. Sleek Starfleet exploratory vessels glide out of the dry docks, completely unarmed for the first time in a year. Escorting them to the perimeter are massive, dark green Klingon birds of prey, fulfilling their new mandate as the Alpha Quadrant's primary security force. It is a beautiful, deeply uneasy piece. Inside the hangar, the absolute silence of the void is being violently shattered by the opening guitar riff of AC/DC's Thunderstruck. The music is not coming from a wall speaker. It is blaring at ear-splitting volume directly from the external comm array of a towering, matte black Cat-class sentient corvette. Dan O'Keefe rolls out from underneath the landing struts on a grav creeper, wiping grease from his forehead. He taps the hull with his wrench. "Spanner, volume down, buddy. My teeth are rattling." Dan yells over the driving bass line. The music abruptly drops to a manageable background hum. "Apologies, Dan," the ship's deep, resonant voice replies. The Optonian corvette, now officially designated Spanner, pulses its icy blue optical visor in rhythm with the hi-hat. "I am currently analyzing the chaotic frequency modulation of late 20th century Earth audio. The aggressive acoustic patterns provide optimal background stimulation for diagnostic subroutines. It is a banger, as you would say." Mel Stufel walks down the ramp of the newly polished gold 4 Griffin scout ship parked in the next slip. She is wearing her standard uniform, the miniskirt variant, moving with effortless, relaxed grace. She leans against Spanner's massive landing strut, laughing. "I leave you two alone for one afternoon, and you turn a sentient, planet-cracking war machine into a classic rock jukebox," Mel grins. "Sarah is going to kill you if you teach him how to play air guitar, Dan." "Hey, it wasn't me. He found the historical archives on his own." Dan protests, standing up and tossing his wrench into a toolbox. "Besides, it's better than listening to Envoy Prime recite probability statistics for 3 hours." Envoy Prime's acoustic output lacks a driving bass line, Spanner observes dryly, adjusting his internal lighting to a dim, moody purple to match the guitar solo. The Uneasy Alliance. The turbolift doors at the far end of the hangar hiss open. Lieutenant Anna Shvetsov strides onto the deck. The flight leader of Gold Flight looks sharp, holding a PADD, but there is a distinct tightness around her eyes. The war might be over, but navigating the peace is proving to be a massive headache. Walking in lockstep right behind her is Envoy Prime. The synthetic machine still wears the flawless, biological face of Commander Valak. It is a daily, walking ghost for the veterans of Gold Flight, but they have slowly learned to live with the eerie tribute. "Turn the music off, Spanner," Anna orders, walking up to her pilots. "We have a briefing." Pausing playback, the massive ship hums obediently, the hangar falling quiet. "What's the word, boss?" Dan asks, grabbing a towel. "Are we finally getting off this station? I've been staring at the same bulkheads for 3 weeks." "We are," Anna says, pulling up a star chart on the holographic projector in the center of the deck. But it's not a milk run. The hollow table illuminates, displaying a massive, unexplored region of space located directly on the far side of the now-dead Typhon expanse. With the Prime Queen destroyed and the expanse calcified, a massive corridor has opened up into the Beta Quadrant, Anna explains, pointing to the blank spots on the map. Under the new treaty, Starfleet is pushing back into deep space exploration. We're sending a long-range science cruiser, the USS Magellan, through the corridor to map the new sectors. Mel crosses her arms, studying the tactical overlay. "And let me guess, the Klingon aren't happy about an unarmed science ship poking around in the dark." General Kvok is absolutely furious. Anna nods, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The Empire is convinced that pushing blindly into unknown space is going to wake up something worse than the Hive. Kvok demanded the Magellan be escorted by a full Klingon attack wing. Admiral Quinn refused, citing that it sends a hostile message to any new civilizations we meet. Envoy Prime steps forward, clasping its hands behind its back in that perfectly, agonizingly familiar Vulcan stance. The mathematical probability of encountering hostile entities in an uncharted sector borders on absolute certainty, Envoy Prime states in Valak's voice. A compromise was struck to prevent the treaty from fracturing. Starfleet will not send a heavy cruiser escort, and the Klingon will not send a war fleet. Anna looks at Dan and Mel. They're sending Gold Flight. The Frontier calls. Just us. Dan asks, his eyebrows raising. 4 Griffin Scouts and the Optonian wingmen acting as the entire security detail for a deep space science mission? We are the only unit that holds the respect of Starfleet, the Klingon Empire, and the Optonian Collective, Anna says flatly. Kvok trusts us to shoot first if things go sideways. Quinn trusts us not to start a war by accident. And the Envoy trusts us because Spanner and the other vanguards refuse to fly with anyone else. Mel looks at the blank, unexplored void on the star chart. The anxiety that used to paralyze her is completely absent, replaced by a thrilling, burning curiosity. She has her body back, she has her squad, and she has the fastest ship in the fleet. We're going into the absolute unknown, Mel says, a sharp, confident smile spreading across her face. She looks over at the massive black hull of the sentient corvette. What do you think, Spanner? You ready to see what's out there? The pack corvette's blue visor pulses with bright, eager energy. My long-range sensors are calibrated, ensign Stufel, and my audio archives contain 412 hours of appropriate road trip anthems. I am prepared. Dan laughs, clapping his hands together. All right then, let's go pack our bags. When do we launch, Anna? 0600 tomorrow, Anna says, shutting down the holo table. Get some sleep. We're going off the edge of the map. Welcome to Season 7. The tone is set, a tense, Cold War-style peace at home, and a massive, wide-open frontier ahead of them. The Magellan expedition gives Gold Flight a perfect reason to encounter weird anomalies, new alien empires, and ancient mysteries, all while balancing their trigger-happy Klingon mandates with Starfleet's peaceful ideals. Season 7, Episode 2. Echoes in the Dark. Location: Uncharted Sector Beta 9, beyond the calcified expanse. Time: 3 weeks into the expedition. The USS Magellan is a beautiful ship, built for discovery rather than destruction. It glides through the absolute blackness of the Beta Quadrant, its massive deflector dish casting a soft blue glow into space that hasn't seen a Federation vessel in its entire history. Flying in a wide, protective diamond formation around the science cruiser are the 4 Griffin-class heavy scouts of Gold Flight. Shadowing them perfectly are the 4 towering, matte black Optonian corvettes. Inside the cockpit of Gold 4, the hum of the oversized impulse engines is accompanied by the very faint, tinny sound of Queen's under pressure playing over the encrypted comlink. The bass line is mathematically exquisite, Spanner murmurs over the channel, his massive corvette drifting seamlessly off Gold 4's starboard wing. However, the vocal range of Freddie Mercury defies standard biological parameters. It is fascinating. Dan O'Keefe chuckles, adjusting the navigational sensors. Wait until I introduce you to Led Zeppelin, Spanner. It's going to blow your heuristic matrix. In the tactical seat behind him, Mel Stufel is scrolling through the long-range telemetry. She is relaxed, her boots resting lightly on the lower console rungs, the miniskirt uniform perfectly comfortable as she works. Suddenly, her console chimes. A single, sharp, repeating tone cuts through the classic rock. Mel sits up straight, instantly switching from relaxed co-pilot to lethal tactician. Dan, cut the music. I've got a ping. Playback paused. Spanner acknowledges immediately, his tone dropping its inquisitive warmth and returning to absolute, cold combat readiness. Gold Flight, this is 4. Mel reports over the open channel. I'm catching a localized subspace transmission. Bearing 019er. It's weak, heavily degraded by background radiation. I see it, Stu Full. Lieutenant Anna Shvetsov's icy voice replies from Gold 1. Magellan Actual. Are you reading this? We are, Lieutenant. The captain of the Magellan responds. It's an automated distress beacon. But the frequency modulation, it doesn't match Starfleet, Klingon, Romulan, or any known Alpha Quadrant database. It's completely alien. We are the Vanguard, Anna says. Gold Flight, Vanguards, break formation. Let's go see who's crying in the dark. Magellan, hold your position until we clear the airspace. The Monolith. The 4 Griffin scouts and the Optonian corvettes bank sharply away from the science cruiser, pushing their impulse engines to close the distance. As they navigate through a dense, icy asteroid field, the source of the beacon finally registers on their visual sensors. It is a starship, but it looks like nothing they have ever seen. It is massive, easily the size of 3 Starfleet heavy cruisers put together. It doesn't have the sleek saucers of the Federation or the aggressive, bird-like wings of the Klingon Empire. It looks like a monolithic slab of smooth, obsidian-like stone, carved with deep, jagged geometric trenches. There are no visible engines, no windows, and no weapons banks. It is completely dark, dead in the water, drifting silently through the ice field. By the prophets, Dan whispers, his hands gripping the yoke. That thing looks like a tombstone. Scanning the hull, Mottel reports from Gold 2, his cybernetic eye feeding the data into his Griffin's overpowered sensors. Anna, the isotopic decay on that hull material is staggering. This ship isn't a casualty of the Hive War. It has been drifting in this sector for at least 10,000 years. 10,000 years? Mrak hisses. There should be nothing left but dust. Stu Full, get me a deep penetrating scan. Anna orders. Find out what's powering that beacon. Mel routes Gold 4's sensor array directly through Spanner's massive Optonian deflector dish, creating a high-frequency tachyonic pulse that ghosts right through the obsidian hull of the derelict. The data floods her screens. I'm through the outer armor, Mel says, her eyes darting across the readouts. The internal architecture is a labyrinth. No atmosphere, zero gravity, ambient temperature is near absolute zero. But deep in the center of the ship, I've got a power source. It's faint, running on some kind of geothermal decay. Mel pauses, her breath catching in her throat. And, Anna, right next to the power source. I have a biological signature. It's in stasis. Something is still alive in there. The breach. The silence on the comms is heavy. A 10,000-year-old ghost ship, and a single survivor sleeping in the dark. The Magellan's primary directive is exploration and rendering aid. The captain's voice chimes in. Lieutenant Shvetsov, Starfleet protocol dictates we investigate and attempt a rescue. With all due respect, Captain, Starfleet protocol wasn't written for crypts, Anna replies coldly. She knows the risks of opening ancient doors. But she also wears the uniform. Gold Flight, we're going in. Dan, Mel, you're with me. Jeklo, Mottel, Mrak, hold the perimeter with the vanguards. If anything comes out of that ship that isn't us, vaporize it. Understood. Spanner's voice hums, his massive weapons banks powering up. We will ensure your extraction vector remains clear. Dan pilots Gold for alongside Gold 1. They drift over the jagged geometric trenches of the massive black ship until they find a large, hexagonal iris that looks like a dormant airlock. Dan and Mel suit up in heavily armored EVA vacuum suits. Mel locks her Klingon DK Tog to her magnetic thigh plate and grabs a heavy Type 3 phaser rifle. The airlocks of the Griffin cycle. Dan, Mel, and Anna push off from their ships, floating silently through the absolute zero of space, using their suit thrusters to navigate down to the obsidian hull. Anna attaches a localized spatial breaching charge to the hexagonal iris. A silent, blinding flash of white light later, the ancient doors are forced open. Into the dark, they step inside. The interior of the ship is terrifying. It is pitch black, illuminated only by the harsh white beams of their EVA shoulder lamps. The walls are made of the same smooth, black stone-like material, but they are covered in sprawling, intricate, faintly glowing silver glyphs that hurt the eyes to look at for too long. There is no gravity. They use their magnetic boots to walk along the deck plating, their heavy footsteps vibrating through their suits. Radiation levels are nominal, but it's freezing, Dan reports, checking his wrist tricorder. The distress beacon is coming from a chamber exactly 400 meters dead ahead. They move in a tight tactical wedge, phaser rifles raised. Anna takes point, with Mel and Dan checking the flanks. As they navigate the winding, silent corridors, they begin to find the crew. Floating in the zero-gravity are tall, slender humanoid figures wearing intricate, biomechanical environmental suits. They are completely calcified, frozen in poses of absolute terror. Some are clawing at the bulkheads. Others are holding weapons that look like jagged shards of glass. They didn't die of old age. Mel whispers over the private comlink, shining her light on a massive, gaping hole in the chest of one of the calcified aliens. Something tore through them. Keep your eyes peeled, Anna orders, her phaser sweeping the dark. Whatever did this might still be here. They finally reach the central chamber. It is a massive, cavernous room. In the exact center, suspended in a web of glowing silver energy cables, is a large, translucent stasis pod. Inside the pod is one of the slender aliens. It is alive, its chest rising and falling in a shallow, artificially induced sleep. But as Anna steps forward to scan the pod, Mel's tactical instincts scream at her. She looks up, her shoulder lamp piercing the darkness, near the vaulted ceiling. Clinging to the shadows above the stasis pod are massive, jagged, crystalline cocoons. And as the light hits them, one of the cocoons begins to crack open. A localized comping hits their suits. It's from Spanner outside. Gold Flight. The ambient power source inside the derelict has just spiked by 4,000%. The ship is waking up. And you are no longer alone in that room. The glass predators. Grab the pod and run. Anna's voice cracks over the comms, entirely abandoning the careful, methodical approach of a Starfleet away team. Cut those cables. Dan holsters his phaser and immediately draws his heavy plasma cutter, activating his suit thrusters to propel himself over the stasis pod. Above them, the crystalline cocoon completely shatters. It isn't a hive bug. It doesn't have amber bioresin or scythe-like claws. The creature that drops from the ceiling is a terrifying construct of jagged, obsidian-like shards held together by a pulsing, violet energy core. It has no eyes, no mouth, and it makes no biological sound. Instead, it emits a localized electromagnetic screech that violently scrambles the HUDs inside their EVA helmets. It moves with sickening, impossible speed, manipulating localized gravity to launch itself directly at Dan's back. Mel doesn't hesitate. She plants her magnetic boots firmly onto the deck plating, raises her heavy Type 3 phaser rifle, and pulls the trigger. The heavy, concentrated orange beam of the Starfleet rifle hits the crystalline creature midair. It doesn't burn or melt like biological armor. The phaser blast shatters the creature's outer shards like a pane of glass. The violet energy core sputters, and the creature is violently thrown backward into the vaulted ceiling, scattering obsidian fragments into the zero-G environment. The recoil of the heavy rifle in the vacuum of space tries to throw Mel backward, but she locks her suit's knee servos, holding the line. "Keep cutting, O'Keefe," Mel yells, shifting her aim as the ceiling above them begins to light up with a dozen more glowing violet cores. They're waking up. I'm through the primary tethers. Dan grunts, the blinding blue spark of his plasma cutter slicing through the final glowing silver cable holding the stasis pod in place. The massive, translucent pod drifts free. Inside, the slender alien does not wake, still suspended in its deep, artificial sleep. "I've got the port side. Dan, take starboard," Anna orders. She grabs one of the heavy handles on the side of the pod, firing her suit's maneuvering thrusters to physically push the heavy mass toward the exit. "Mel, fall back," Dan yells, grabbing the other side of the pod and matching Anna's thrust. Mel keeps her rifle raised, walking backward toward the corridor. The creatures are reforming. The shattered obsidian fragments are being pulled back together by the violet energy cores. They don't crawl. They glide through the zero gravity, like sharks in dark water. Mel fires a continuous, sweeping burst, vaporizing 3 of the violet cores and permanently disabling them, before turning and hitting her own thrusters to follow Dan and Anna into the winding labyrinth of the derelict ship. The chase in the dark. The escape is a terrifying, high-speed flight through pitch-black corridors. Dan and Anna are using their thrusters to physically tow the massive stasis pod, dodging the floating, calcified corpses of the ancient crew. Mel flies backward, acting as the rear guard. Behind them, the darkness comes alive. The electromagnetic screeching of the glass predators causes their comlinks to burst with agonizing static. Gold 4. Status. Spanner's voice tries to punch through the interference from outside the ship. I am detecting massive kinetic signatures moving toward your location. Spanner, we have the package. Mel shouts over the static, firing blind down the dark corridor as a crystalline shard narrowly misses her helmet visor. Lock a tractor beam on the breach point and be ready to pull. They round the final corner. The hexagonal airlock they blew open is dead ahead, framing a beautiful, terrifying view of the starfield and the massive, matte black hull of the Optonian corvette waiting outside. We're at the breach. Push. Anna yells. Dan and Anna throw all their remaining suit power into their thrusters, shoving the heavy stasis pod out of the airlock and into the vacuum of open space. Instantly, a thick, blue gravimetric beam lashes out from Spanner's deflector dish, catching the pod and pulling it safely toward the Magellan. Mel reaches the breach just as a half-dozen of the violet-glowing predators swarm down the corridor behind her. She dives backward, out of the ancient ship. Clear the firing line and sign. Spanner's voice hums with icy precision. As Mel, Dan, and Anna drift clear of the hull, Spanner's heavy shoulder cannons glow white-hot. The sentient corvette unleashes a pinpoint, devastating barrage of plasma directly into the open airlock of the ghost ship. The explosion incinerates the pursuing creatures, sealing the breach in a melted pool of obsidian slag. The ghost vanishes. Good shooting, Spanner. Dan gasps, his chest heaving inside his EVA suit. Warning. Mottel's voice suddenly cuts over the tactical net from Gold 2. The derelict's power core is spiking exponentially. It isn't a warp drive. It's spatial folding. Before Gold Flight can even raise their shields, the massive, 10,000-year-old obsidian ship pulses with a blinding, violent violet light. Space itself seems to warp and bend around the monolithic hull. In an instant, the ship folds inward, collapsing into a singularity the size of a pinprick, and vanishes. There is no warp trail. There is no residual radiation. It is simply gone, leaving the 4 Griffin scouts, the Optonian corvettes, and the Magellan completely alone in the ice field. Where did it go? Jeklo demands from Gold 1. Unknown. Envoy Prime's voice reports from the Magellan's bridge. The displacement method defies all current Federation and Optonian physics models. They did not travel through standard subspace. Mel floats in the zero gravity, lowering her phaser rifle. She looks over at the massive stasis pod secured in Spanner's tractor beam. Well, Mel breathes, her heart still hammering against her ribs. I guess we just found out why this sector is empty. The sleeper awakens. Location, Medical Bay, USS Magellan. Time, 6 hours later. The Magellan has retreated to a safe distance, holding position while the science teams analyze their prize. Inside the massive, sterile medical bay, Gold Flight stands behind a transparent aluminum quarantine barrier. Admiral Quinn is monitoring the feed directly from Starbase 12 via subspace link. The stasis pod has been opened. Laying on the primary biobed is the alien. It is humanoid, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with pale, almost translucent skin and intricate, silver bioluminescent patterns tracing along its jawline and collarbone. It wears a skin-tight environmental suit made of a material Starfleet sensors can identify. The Magellan's chief medical officer types a sequence into the console. The stasis matrix is degrading. I am administering a mild neural stimulant. We're waking him up. Dan crosses his arms, leaning close to the glass. You think he speaks Federation standard? I think he's been asleep for 10 millennia, Anna replies flatly. I doubt he even knows what a human is. The alien takes a sharp, sudden breath. Its chest arches off the bio bed. Its eyes snap open. They are solid, piercing silver, completely devoid of pupils or irises. The alien sits up with terrifying speed, ignoring the medical staff entirely. It looks around the room, its silver eyes darting across the Starfleet uniforms, the medical equipment, and finally resting on the face of Envoy Prime standing quietly in the corner. The alien raises a long, slender hand and points directly at the machine-wearing Valak's face. When it speaks, it does not use a universal translator. It speaks directly into the minds of everyone in the room, a telepathic voice that rings like a perfectly struck tuning fork. You possess the shell of a synthetic, but you carry the weapon of the builders. Envoy Prime tilts its head. I am an Optonian. You refer to the nanite technology in my core? The Devourer swarm. The alien corrects, its silver eyes wide with ancient, absolute terror. The dust that eats the stars. You are using the weapon that destroyed my empire. The room goes dead silent. The Optonian nanites, the weapon Starfleet used to kill the Hive, the weapon Section 31 is trying to steal, didn't come from a rogue scientist in a Starfleet black site. They are 10,000 years old. And they are the reason this sector is a graveyard. The revelation hangs in the sterile air of the Magellan's medical bay like a live grenade. The Devourer swarm. The nanites that saved Earth and destroyed the Hive weren't a Starfleet invention. They were an ancient, apocalyptic weapon that had already eradicated at least one galactic empire 10 millennia ago. On the subspace monitor, Admiral Quinn looks like all the air has been punched out of his lungs. Envoy, is this true? Did the collective know the origin of your core architecture? Envoy Prime stares at the Ethelin, the synthetic's blue eyes pulsing erratically for the first time. Negative, Admiral. The collective's databanks only extend to our initial awakening sequence. We possess the weapon, but not its history. If this entity speaks the truth, our entire existence is built upon an extinction-level event. The Ethelin sits up further, its silver eyes locking onto Anna. You must destroy the synthetic. If the swarm is active, the galaxy will burn again. You do not understand what you have unleashed. Before the ancient alien can finish, the Magellan violently shudders. The deck plating pitches sideways, throwing the medical staff to the floor. The sterile white lights of the medical bay instantly snap to strobing crimson, and the deafening shriek of the red alert klaxon drowns out the Ethelin's warning. Shields buckling. We are under attack. The Magellan's captain bellows over the ship-wide PA. Multiple hostile contacts decloaking at point-blank range. The House of Duras. Anna Shvetsov hits her comm badge, her voice slicing through the chaos. Gold flight to bridge. Identify the attackers. Is it the Hive? Negative, Lieutenant, the panicked tactical officer replies. It's Klingon. 1 Vorcha-class attack cruiser and 3 Brel birds of prey. They were running silent under the Expanse's radiation shadows. The main monitor in the Medbay flickers, replacing Admiral Quinn's shocked face with the heavily armored, sneering visage of a Klingon commander. He wears the crest of a disgraced, treacherous lineage. Starfleet Vessel Magellan. The Klingon snarls, his voice dripping with arrogant triumph. I am Commander Cornyn, of the House of Duras. You have uncovered the ultimate weapon. General Kvok and the High Council are weak fools for treating with the Federation. The House of Duras will claim the alien, we will breed our own Devourer swarm, and we will wash the Empire in the blood of our enemies. Lower your shields and surrender the creature, or we will carve it out of your hull. Duras, Mrak hisses, her claws unsheathing. Treacherous Pitaku. They have always sought to usurp the Chancellor. They aren't getting this alien, Anna snaps. She turns to the squad. Gold flight, to the hangar. We need the Griffins in the air now. Magellan, divert all auxiliary power to structural integrity. Do not let them breach the hull. Shoot to thrill. Location, space surrounding the USS Magellan. Time, 0615 hours. The void of the Beta Quadrant erupts into a furious, point-blank furball. The Magellan is entirely outgunned. It is a science vessel, currently taking a brutal pounding from the Vorcha cruiser's heavy disruptor banks. The 4 Griffin scouts blast out of the Magellan's hangar bays, dropping right into the crossfire. Vanguard Wing, engage the birds of prey. Keep them off the science ship. Anna orders over the tactical net. Inside Gold 4, Dan shoves the throttle to maximum, throwing the heavy scout into a punishing corkscrew maneuver to dodge a volley of green plasma from a diving Brel. Shields are holding, but these Duras pilots are flying like fanatics. Dan grunts, fighting the yoke. They want a throne, Dan. They don't care if they die for it. Mel yells from the tactical seat. Her hands blur across the weapons console. She locks onto the trailing bird of prey and unleashes a staggering barrage from the Griffin's rotary pulse cannons, chewing into the Klingons' aft deflectors. Suddenly, a massive, matte black pack corvette drops directly into their flight path. It's Spanner. The sentient Optonian ship intercepts a massive disruptor blast meant for Gold 4, his heavy Starfleet mimicking armor barely scorching under the impact. And then, the music hits the commnet. It isn't an Optonian tactical hum. It is the raw, screeching guitar intro of AC/DC Shoot to Thrill, perfectly synced to the firing rhythm of Spanner's plasma banks. I have analyzed the Dura's attack patterns. Ensign Stufel. Spanner's voice echoes over the thundering rock track, sounding almost excited. Their aggression makes them predictable. If Ensign O'Keefe cuts his port impulse drive by 40%, he will perfectly bait the Klingon into my firing solution. You heard the jukebox, Dan. Cut to port. Mel laughs, the sheer adrenaline of the dogfight surging through her. Dan yanks the yoke hard, intentionally bleeding speed. The Dura's bird of prey takes the bait, diving in for the kill. As the Klingon ship drops its nose, Spanner executes a flawless, mathematically impossible inverted loop, unleashing a blinding white beam of raw Optonian energy that completely shears the bird of prey's starboard wing off. The Klingon ship spins wildly out of control, careening into the icy asteroid field and exploding in a massive fireball. Target neutralized, Spanner hums over the guitar solo. Rock and roll. The breaching pods. Good kill, Spanner. Dan cheers. But the celebration is cut short. Anna, look at the Vorcha. Mottel shouts from Gold 2. The massive Dura's attack cruiser completely ignores the Griffin scouts. It absorbs the Magellan's weak phaser fire, pushing aggressively into point-blank range of the science ship's hull. The belly of the Vorcha opens. Instead of firing torpedoes, the Klingon cruiser launches 6 massive, heavily armored breaching pods. They fire like harpoons, trailing heavy duranium tether cables, and slam directly into the Magellan's primary saucer section. The impact violently shakes the science ship, the pods physically biting into the Starfleet hull. Hull breach on Deck 4. Medical Bay. The Magellan's captain screams over the comms. They've bypassed the shields. Klingon boarding parties are in the corridors. They're going straight for the ethylene. Damn it. Anna curses. The Duras faction isn't trying to destroy the Magellan. They are executing a smash and grab to kidnap the alien and extract the Devourer swarm secrets from his mind. Gold flight. Anna barks. The Magellan security teams can't handle Klingon shock troops. We have to repel those boarders. We're in the middle of a dogfight, Anna. Jeklo roars from Gold 1, currently trading heavy fire with the remaining 2 birds of prey. If we dock, those Brels will tear the Magellan apart. The battle has split perfectly down the middle. They're losing the space outside, and they're losing the hallways inside. Season 7, Episode 3, The Toll of Duras. Location, space surrounding the USS Magellan. Time, 0618 hours. Spanner, Vanguard Wing. Hold the airspace. Gold 1, Gold 4, we're going in. Anna's voice snaps over the comms, possessing the absolute, unshakable authority of a flight leader who knows exactly what it costs to wear the uniform. Copy that, Anna. Dan yells. Magellan, drop your starboard deflectors for exactly 2 seconds. We're beaming over. In the dark space outside, The Griffin scouts of Gold 1 and Gold 4 pull up alongside the science vessel's primary hull. As the Magellan's shields flicker, four columns of shimmering blue Starfleet transporter energy pull Anna, Jeklo, Dan, and Mel from their cockpits. In the space above them, Mottel and Rack in Gold 2, backed by the four massive Optonian corvettes, dive aggressively toward the Dura's Vorcha cruiser to draw its heavy fire. The corridors of blood. Dan, Mel, Anna, and Jeklo materialize directly in the corridor outside the Magellan's medical bay. The air is thick with smoke, the acrid smell of burning EPS conduits, and the terrifying, guttural war cries of Klingon shock troops. The Dura's boarding party has already blasted through the security bulkheads. "Form the line," Anna shouts, raising her heavy phaser rifle. 6 massive Dura's warriors, clad in heavy spiked armor and wielding jagged bat'leths and disruptor rifles, round the corner. They aren't fighting for honor. They are fighting with the fanatical, frothing desperation of a disgraced house trying to secure a galactic superweapon. The corridor erupts into a blinding, deafening crossfire. Mel drops to one knee, her tactical instincts taking over, firing surgical phaser bursts that drop the lead Klingon. Dan lays down heavy suppressing fire, forcing the Dura's troops into cover behind the sparking bulkheads. But there are too many of them. They're flanking us through the Jeffries tubes. Jeklo roars. 2 Klingon warriors drop from the ceiling access panels directly behind them, swinging their heavy blades. Jeklo doesn't even bother raising his rifle. The massive Orion drops his weapon and meets the charge head-on. He catches the descending bat'leth of the first Klingon with his bare, duranium gauntlet hands, letting out a terrifying, primal roar that shakes the deck plating. Jeklo physically lifts the Dura's warrior off his feet and hurls him into the second attacker, crushing them both against the bulkhead. "Get into the med bay. Protect the ethylene," Anna orders, laying down a wall of fire. The fall of Gold 1. Dan and Mel fall back into the medical bay, where the Magellan's terrified medical staff are cowering behind the biobeds. The ethylene alien stands in the center of the room, its silver eyes watching the violence with ancient, detached horror. "Anna, Jeklo, move." Dan screams from the doorway. But the corridor is swarming. A dozen more Dura's troops pour through the breach. A heavy disruptor blast catches Jeklo squarely in the chest. The massive Orion staggers, his armor superheating, but he refuses to fall. He draws his heavy Starfleet sidearm, firing point-blank into the charging Klingon, buying the squad precious seconds. "Go!" Jeklo grunts, blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. "Hold the door." 3 Dura's warriors swarm him, driving their blades into the brawler's flanks. Jeklo goes down, taking his killers with him in a final, defiant roar. "Jeklo!" Mel screams, surging forward, but Anna grabs her by the shoulder and physically throws her back into the medical bay. Anna Shpetsov stands alone in the doorway. The icy, unbreakable flight leader looks at Mel and Dan. There is no fear in her eyes, only the cold, calculating realization that the math has finally caught up to her. "You're the alpha now, Stufel," Anna says quietly. "Hold the line." Anna hits the manual override on the blast doors. As the heavy duranium doors begin to slide shut, Anna turns her back to Gold 4, raising her rifle and stepping directly into the path of the Dura's swarm to ensure the door locks. Through the closing gap, Mel and Dan watch the green flash of heavy disruptor fire illuminate the corridor. The blast doors slam shut, sealing with a heavy, final thud. Dan slams his fist against the impenetrable metal, his breathing ragged. Mel stares at the door, her hands shaking around her rifle. Anna and Jeklo are gone. The broken shield. Outside the Magellan, the space battle is turning into a slaughter. Commander Cornyn realizes his boarding party is locked out of the medical bay. Enraged, he decides that if the House of Duras cannot have the ancient weapon, no one will. All batteries. Vaporize the Starfleet vessel. Cornyn roars from the bridge of the Vorcha. The massive Duras attack cruiser routes all power to its forward torpedo tubes. A devastating, continuous volley of high-yield photon torpedoes streaks toward the unshielded hull of the Magellan. Mottel, the Magellan cannot survive that impact. Mrak hisses from Gold 2. They won't have to. A calm, synthetic voice echoes over the comms. Two of the massive, matte black Optonian corvettes break formation. They do not fire their weapons. They push their massive impulse drives past the red line, throwing their colossal duranium hulls directly into the path of the torpedo volley. Vanguard 3. Vanguard 5. Abort. Envoy Prime commands from the Magellan's bridge. The two sentient ships do not abort. They act on the human instinct they learned from Gold Flight. You protect your wingmen at all costs. The torpedoes strike the corvettes. The massive explosions tear the Optonian vessels apart, shattering their armor and detonating their cores. The two sentient ships are completely vaporized in a blinding flash of white light, but their sacrifice absorbs the entirety of the Dura's barrage. The Magellan is spared. Spanner, hovering nearby, watches his brethren burn. His optical visor flashes a furious, violent crimson. You have miscalculated, Duras. Spanner's voice booms across the open, multi-fleet channel. Spanner and the remaining Vanguard do not fire plasma. They initiate a micro-warp jump, materializing mere meters above the Vorcha cruiser. The two surviving Optonian corvettes transform into their towering bipedal mech forms, crashing heavily onto the Klingon cruiser's hull. They use their bare, mechanical hands to literally rip the Vorcha's primary disruptor cannons out of their mounts, completely castrating the Dura's warship. Terrified and crippled, Commander Cornyn orders an immediate retreat. The broken Dura's cruiser limps into warp, leaving a trail of debris and blood behind it. Flesh and steel. Location: Hangar Bay, USS Magellan. Time: 12 hours later. The Magellan is limping back towards Starbase 12. The surviving Dura's boarding parties were mopped up by Starfleet security, but the cost was staggering. The hangar bay is quiet. The two Griffin scouts sit silently on the deck. Mel and Dan are sitting on the loading ramp of Gold 4. They are covered in soot and exhausted beyond words. The loss of Anna and Jeklo leaves a gaping, hollow void in the squad. Mel stares at the deck plating, the weight of Anna's final words, "You're the Alpha now," pressing down on her shoulders. Footsteps echo across the hangar. Dan and Mel look up. Walking toward them are two Starfleet officers they have never seen before. They are wearing standard Starfleet duty uniforms. One is a tall, broadly built man with sharp, angular features and intense, icy blue eyes. The other is a slightly shorter, athletic woman with identical blue eyes and a posture of perfect, mathematical precision. They stop at the bottom of the ramp. "Who are you?" Dan asks, his voice hoarse. "Replacements from the Magellan crew?" The tall man looks at Dan. When he speaks, the voice is human, but the cadence is unmistakable. "We are not from the Magellan, Dan," the man says softly. "I am Spanner." Mel's eyes widen in absolute shock. She stands up, leaning on the railing. "Spanner? How? Your chassis is 50 feet tall." "Our primary corvettes remain outside, flying on autopilot." The woman speaks up, her voice calm and steady. "I am Vanguard Unit 8. I have chosen the designation Aegis." When Vanguard 3 and 5 sacrifice themselves, Spanner explains, looking at his human hands, flexing the fingers as if still getting used to the sensation of flesh. "We realized that duranium armor is insufficient to protect you. We needed to fight where you fight. In the corridors. In the cockpits. We utilized our heuristic matrices and the Magellan's industrial replicators to synthesize biological avatars. We are directly neural linked to our ships." Aegis steps forward, looking at the empty cockpits of the Griffin scouts. "Lieutenant Shvetsov and Ensign Jeklo are gone," Aegis says, her voice carrying a profound, quiet respect. Gold Flight is broken, but the collective does not abandon its wingmen. Spanner looks at Mel, the towering, sentient warship, now looking like a sharply dressed human pilot, offers a small, tight smile. "If you will have us, Alpha," Spanner says, "we request permission to fill their seats." Mel looks at the two synthetic humans standing before her. They lost half their squad, and the Optonians lost half their wing. They are all orphans of the same war. Mel stands up straight, wiping the soot from her face, her eyes hardening into the fierce, unyielding gaze of a true flight leader. "Permission granted," Mel says, her voice steady. "Welcome to Gold Flight. Grab your gear. We have a lot of work to do." Season 7, Episode 4, The Ghosts in the Machine. Location: 14th Tactical Wing Barracks, Starbase 12. Time: 0800 hours. Mel Stoufel stands at the head of the briefing table. She is wearing the flight leader's single gold pip on her collar. The weight of it feels like a physical anchor around her neck. Sitting around the table is a bizarre, deeply fractured squad. On the left are the veterans: Dan O'Keefe, staring blankly at a datapad; Martel, his cybernetic eye dimmed in low-power mode; and Mrak, whose tail is completely still, the Kytion mourning the loss of her pack leader in absolute silence. On the right are the Optonian avatars. Spanner sits rigidly, his icy blue human eyes intensely focused on the table. Beside him, Aegis sits with perfect, mathematical posture, her hands folded neatly in her lap. And standing near the door, looking completely out of place, are the two new official Starfleet replacements Admiral Quinn assigned to Gold Flight that morning. Lieutenant Tvane, a Vulcan tactical officer, sharp, by the book, and exuding an aura of absolute logic. She was brought in to fill Anna's tactical seat. Ensign Thalen, a hot-blooded, blue-skinned Andorian pilot with a reputation for aggressive maneuvers. He was brought in to replace Jeklo. "I have reviewed the flight logs from the Magellan incident," Tvane says, her voice a calm, even monotone that grates against the raw nerves of the room. "The casualty rate was unacceptable. Lieutenant Shvetsov's decision to lock herself behind the blast doors was a tactical error. She possessed the firepower to hold a retreating line." Mrak lets out a sudden, terrifying snarl, half rising from her chair. "She traded her life to save the mission, Vulcan," Dan growls, grabbing Mrak's arm to hold the Kytion back. "Don't sit there and quote a textbook at us. You weren't in that hallway." "Emotions do not alter the tactical reality," Ensign O'Keefe. Tvane replies smoothly. Thalen, the Andorian, crosses his arms and looks at Spanner and Aegis. "Look, we're here to fly. The Admiral assigned us to Gold 1 and Gold 3. But command structure dictates a 2-person crew per Griffin. We have 8 pilots and 4 ships. Are we actually expected to share cockpits with synthetic projections?" "We are not projections," Aegis states, her voice calm but carrying a strange, underlying density. "Our biological avatars are fully integrated with our heuristic matrices. We breathe. We bleed. We are mathematically identical to you." Ensign Thalen. "Math doesn't fly a ship," Thalen scoffs. "Instinct does." At the end of the table, Spanner's hands slowly curl into fists. The knuckles of his newly synthesized human hands turn white. "Enough," Mel says. Her voice isn't loud, but it possesses the sharp, unyielding edge that she learned from Lana. The room immediately goes quiet. Mel looks at the new recruits. "Tvane, Thalen, you're in Gold Flight now. We don't care what your academy scores are. You follow my orders, or you walk back to the Admiral and ask for a transfer." "Dismissed." The Vulcan and the Andorian exchange a look, but they nod and file out of the briefing room. The Overload. Location: Hangar Bay 4. Time: 1,400 hours. The heavy, methodical beat of a bass drum echoes through the cavernous hangar. It's not AC/DC today. It's the slow, agonizing, acoustic buildup of Johnny Cash's hurt. Dan walks onto the deck, carrying a Hydra spanner. He stops. Standing beneath the massive, 50-foot chassis of the pack Corvette that shares his name as Spanner, the human avatar is holding a heavy duranium wrench. He is supposed to be calibrating the landing struts. Instead, Spanner is staring at his own hands. His breathing is rapid, uneven, and shallow. He drops the wrench. The heavy metal clatters loudly against the deck plating. Spanner presses his human hands against the side of his head, his fingers digging into his hair. A low, ragged sound tears from his throat, a sound that has absolutely zero mathematical logic behind it. It is a gasp of pure, unfiltered anguish. "Spanner?" Dan calls out, jogging over. Spanner violently slams his fist into the landing strut of his own Corvette body. The impact is staggering. Because his biological avatar is woven with Optonian microfibers, the punch doesn't just break his hand. It physically dents the starship's duranium armor. Spanner doesn't stop.
He hits it again.
And again. His knuckles split open, bright red human blood smearing against the matte black metal. Hey, back off. Dan yells, throwing his arms around Spanner's chest, physically hauling the synthetic human away from the ship. Spanner struggles, his synthetic muscles impossibly strong, but Dan holds on with everything he has, pinning Spanner against a cargo crate. Let me go, Dan. Spanner shouts, his voice cracking. Tears, actual, biological, saline tears, are streaming down his angular face. His icy blue eyes are wide with absolute, suffocating terror. Breathe, buddy. Just breathe. Dan orders, keeping him pinned. Mel sprints onto the deck, having heard the shouting. She skids to a halt, staring in shock at the blood on Spanner's hands and the tears on his face. What's happening to him? Mel asks, kneeling beside them. I cannot calculate it. Spanner gasps, his chest heaving as he slides down the cargo crate to the floor, pulling his knees up to his chest. He stares at his bleeding knuckles, his hands shaking violently. My internal chronometer is functioning. My heuristic matrix is optimal. But my chest is compressing. My optical sensors are leaking fluid. The audio track. Spanner looks up at the massive speaker on the wall, where Johnny Cash's trembling voice fills the hangar. The audio frequency, Spanner whispers, his voice trembling. It hurts, Mel.
It physically hurts my chest.
Vanguard 3 and Vanguard 5, their energy signatures cease to exist. They're gone. And Lieutenant Shvetsov is gone. The math says they're 0. But the biology says they are still here, and I cannot reach them. The void is so loud. Mel drops to her knees next to the towering, broken machine inside a human shell. She understands exactly what is happening. The Optonian built a human body to fight alongside them, but he didn't realize that a human body comes with an endocrine system. He is experiencing adrenaline, cortisol, grief, and a massive panic attack, entirely without the decades of psychological shielding humans naturally build up. He is a newborn god, drowning in a teaspoon of human sorrow. Mel reaches out and gently takes Spanner's bleeding, trembling hands in hers. It's called grief, Spanner, Mel says softly, her own eyes watering. She doesn't use logic. She uses the empathy that her own long, painful journey taught her. It isn't an error in your code. It's supposed to hurt. How do you function? Spanner asks, looking desperately between Mel and Dan. The pain is entirely inefficient. It consumes all processing power. How do you fly with this? We don't do it alone, Dan says, crouching down and resting a heavy, grounding hand on Spanner's shoulder. You wanted to know what makes us human? This is it. We bleed for the people who aren't here anymore. And then we get back in the chair so it doesn't happen to anyone else. Aegis walks out from the shadows of the adjacent Griffin Scout. Her human face is perfectly blank, her posture rigid. She looks at Spanner's tears, and then at the dent in the duranium hull. Your emotional integration is causing a critical cascade failure, Spanner, Aegis says, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. You are compromising your tactical viability. I will initiate a localized dampening subroutine to purge your endocrine receptors. We must remain logical. Spanner looks up at Aegis. He looks at his own blood on Mel's hands. Spanner slowly shakes his head.
No, Aegis.
Do not purge it. Aegis's perfectly sculpted brow furrows in genuine confusion.
Why?
It is destroying your efficiency. Because, Spanner says, his voice thick but steadying, if I purge the pain, I purge them. I will keep it. The Alpha's board. Location, Flight Operations Deck. Time, 1800 hours. Mel stands alone in front of the massive holographic assignment board. The names of her 8 pilots hover in the air. She has to pair them up. She has 2 brand new, highly trained Starfleet officers who don't understand their trauma. She has two Optonian avatars, one drowning in human emotion, the other suppressing it with terrifyingly cold logic. And she has the grieving remnants of her original squad. If she pairs them wrong, they will die in the Beta Quadrant. You look like you're trying to defuse a warp core, Stuful. Mel turns. Admiral Quinn is standing in the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back. I'm trying to figure out how to put a broken puzzle back together. Admiral, Mel says, gesturing to the names. Thalen is too aggressive. Twain is too rigid. Spanner is a raw nerve, and Aegis is turning herself into a calculator to avoid feeling the same thing. Quinn walks up to the board. Command isn't about finding perfect pieces, Lieutenant. It's about finding pieces that can carry each other's weight. You're the flight leader. Make the call. The D6 roleplay hook. Mel has to assign the two-person crews for the 4 Griffin Scouts, Gold 1, 2, 3, and 4. The roster is Mel, Dan, Mottel, Mrak, Spanner, Aegis, Twain, Vulcan, Thalen, and Dorian. Mel stares at the holographic board. The pieces of Gold Flight are scattered, volatile, and hurting. She thinks about Anna locking that blast door. Anna didn't build a squad of lone wolves. She built a pack that survived because they covered each other's blind spots. Mel realizes she can't isolate the rookies or let the veterans wallow in their grief. She has to weave them together. She taps the console, dragging the names into their new slots. Admiral, Mel says, turning away from the board. The roster is set. We launch at 0600. Season 7, Episode 5, The Anchor and the Anomaly. Location, 14th Tactical Wing Briefing Room. Time, 0500 hours. The 8 members of Gold Flight stand around the holotable. The tension in the room is thick enough to cut with a Klingon DK Tog. Listen up, Mel says, taking her place at the head of the table. We are escorting the Magellan into completely uncharted space. The Duras faction is still out there, the Ethylene alien is locked in the science lab, and we are flying with half a new squad. I am not taking any chances. Here are your assignments. Mel taps a button, and the hologram displays the 2-person cockpits of the Griffin Scouts. Gold 4. Mel starts. Dan, you're the veteran. Thalen, you're in his right seat. Thalen's antennae twitch in irritation. Lieutenant, with respect, I was top of my class in evasive maneuvers. Ensign O'Keefe relies on brute force impulse boosting. We have conflicting flight styles. Exactly, Dan says, leaning against the table, giving the Andorian a hard look. You're fast, kid, but you're reckless. I'm going to teach you how to take a hit without vaporizing our nacelles. You fly my way or you walk. Gold 3. Mel continues. Mrak, you're taking the stick. Twain, you have tactical. Twain raises a single, perfectly arched eyebrow. A Kytion pilot. Their reliance on feral instinct over calculated trajectory often leads to a 14% decrease in optimal shield distribution. I will need to heavily compensate from the tactical station. Mrak bares her fangs, a low, dangerous purr vibrating in her chest. Calculate this, Vulcan. When the plasma starts flying, your math will not save you. My claws will. Keep my guns hot and stay out of my way. Gold 2, Mel says, cutting off the argument. Mottel, you're flying with Aegis. Mottel's cybernetic eye whirs, focusing on the flawlessly postured synthetic woman. Aegis nods once, her expression completely blank. I have analyzed Ensign Mottel's combat telemetry. His cybernetic integration provides an acceptable operational baseline. I will ensure our tactical efficiency remains optimal. And Gold 1, Mel finishes, looking down the table. Spanner, you're with me. Spanner looks up, his icy blue human eyes wide. He is still wearing bandages around his knuckles from punching his own hull the day before. Alpha, are you certain? My emotional integration is currently volatile. I don't need a calculator in my right seat, Spanner, Mel says softly, holding his gaze. I need a wingman who knows what it means to lose. We'll figure it out together. Mel looks around the room. The friction is palpable. We are Gold Flight. We don't have to like each other today, but we're going to trust each other tomorrow. Mount up. The quiet calibrations. Location, Forward Observation Deck, USS Magellan. Time: 1 week into the Beta Quadrant expedition. The fleet has officially crossed the threshold into the unknown. The Magellan is running deep space scans, moving slowly through a dense, highly ionized nebula. With no immediate threats, Gold Flight is pulling shift rotations, leaving the pilots with actual, quiet downtime on the science cruiser. Aegis sits alone in the observation deck, looking out at the swirling purple and gold gases of the nebula. She has a Starfleet Engineering PADD disassembled on the table in front of her.
She isn't repairing it.
She is compulsively taking it apart and putting it back together, testing the microscopic dexterity of her new biological fingers. The doors hiss open. Mautel walks in, carrying 2 steaming mugs of replicated Balian broth. He stops, his cybernetic eye focusing on the dismantled PADD and then on Aegis. He walks over and sets one of the mugs on the table near her. Your fine motor skills are operating at 99.8% efficiency, Mautel notes, his metallic voice humming quietly. You don't need to test them. Aegis stops, her hands freezing over the circuitry. She looks up at the blue-skinned cyborg. My physical parameters are stable, Aegis admits, her voice perfectly level. However, my heuristic matrix is experiencing background processing errors. Unexplained data loops. Mautel sits down across from her. He doesn't offer a platitude. He understands the intersection of flesh and machinery better than anyone on the ship. When he lost half his face and arm in a plasma fire years ago, he had to learn how to make his biological brain accept the cold duranium replacements. Aegis is doing the exact opposite. What kind of loops? Mautel asks, taking a sip of his broth. Aegis looks out at the nebula. Spanner allowed his endocrine system to overwhelm his logic.
He wept.
It was inefficient. I initiated a localized dampening field in my own neural net to prevent my biological hormones from corrupting my tactical subroutines. Aegis looks back at Mautel. Her icy blue eyes study the red, pulsing glow of his cybernetic optic. But recently, Aegis continues, her brow furrowing in a completely unconscious, deeply human expression of confusion. When I am in the cockpit of Gold 2 with you, or when you enter a room, my core temperature elevates by 0.4 degrees. My heart rate increases from a resting 60 beats per minute to 78. My optical sensors prioritize your physical location over standard perimeter scans. Mautel freezes, his mug halfway to his mouth. I have run 12 internal diagnostics, Aegis says, sounding genuinely frustrated by the lack of a mathematical solution. There is no virus. There is no malfunction. Yet, my system is generating a massive, illogical preference for your proximity. Do you require me to purge this subroutine to maintain Gold 2's efficiency? Mautel sets his mug down very carefully. A faint, dark blue blush creeps up his neck, visible even under his scarred skin. He looks at the machine learning how to be a woman, desperately trying to calculate a feeling she has no equation for. He realizes that, in her own intensely analytical, synthetic way, Aegis just confessed that she is developing a crush on him. No, Aegis, Mautel says, his metallic voice softening into something incredibly gentle. Don't purge it. Why? Aegis asks, tilting her head. It serves no tactical purpose. Because, Mautel says, reaching across the table to gently push the disassembled PADD aside. Some subroutines are worth the processing power, even if they don't make sense right away. Aegis looks at his hand. She slowly reaches out, her synthesized biological fingers lightly brushing against the cold duranium of his cybernetic prosthetic. Her heart rate, entirely unbidden and undampened, ticks up to 82 beats per minute. I will allocate further study to this anomaly, Aegis says softly, not pulling her hand away. The dead world. The quiet moment in the observation deck is shattered by the shrill, repeating tone of the Magellan's red alert klaxon. Gold Flight. To your ships. Mel's voice barks over the ship-wide comms. The Magellan just found what the Ethelyn was looking for. Mautel and Aegis sprint to the hangar bay, piling into the cockpit of Gold 2. The 4 Griffin scouts launch from the Magellan, tearing out of the nebula's cover. When the visual sensors clear, The entire squad falls silent. Hanging in the dark space before them is a planet. Or at least it used to be. It is a massive, terrestrial world, but its entire surface is completely, utterly calcified. It looks exactly like the Prime Queen's corpse, but on a planetary scale. Towering, petrified cities of obsidian-like stone, matching the architecture of the ghost ship they found, crumble into gray dust oceans. Scans confirm. Twain reports from Gold 3, her voice devoid of shock, but entirely grim. Atmosphere is non-existent. No biological life signs. The isotopic decay indicates this world was sterilized approximately 10,000 years ago. The Devourer swarm. Dan breathes from Gold 4. The Nanites did this. They ate an entire civilization. Captain to Gold Flight. The Magellan's commander patches in. The Ethelyn alien is highly agitated in the lab. He claims this is his homeworld, Ethelgard, and he says the original control matrix for the swarm is buried in the ruins of the capital city below. If the matrix is still down there, Mel says, her mind racing, Section 31 or the House of Duras could use it to completely rewrite the Optonian code. They could build a new swarm. We are detecting a massive residual energy spike near the planetary equator. Spanner reports from Mel's right seat, his hands flying across the tactical board. It matches the subterranean architecture of a secure vault. All right, Gold Flight, Mel orders, gripping the yoke of Gold 1. We're going down. We find that matrix, and we destroy it before the ghosts of this sector figure out we're here. Season 7, Episode 6, The Ash of Empires. Location: Upper Atmosphere, Ethelgard. Time: 0815 hours. Gold Flight, lock S-foils into atmospheric configuration. Mel orders from the pilot's seat of Gold 1, her hands gripping the yoke. We're going down. Keep a tight diamond. We don't know what the weather looks like under that cloud cover. Copy, Alpha. Dan replies from Gold 4. The 4 Griffin scouts drop out of orbit, plunging into the thick, gray atmosphere of the dead world. At first, the descent is eerily smooth. There is no turbulence, no atmospheric friction. The planet is a tomb. Below them, the sprawling, continent-sized ruins of the Ethelyn capital city stretch out in every direction, a jagged maze of monolithic, obsidian-like skyscrapers half buried in endless oceans of pale, gray ash. But as the heavy Starfleet scouts cross the 10-kilometer altitude mark, the ambient environment reacts. Alpha, I am detecting a massive electrostatic buildup in the atmospheric particulate. Twain's monotone voice reports from Gold 3. The isotopic decay of the calcified ash is highly reactive to our impulse engine emissions. Before Mel can even process the warning, the dead world wakes up. The moment the Griffin's heavy exhaust plumes hit the gray dunes, the ash doesn't just kick up, it violently ignites. A massive, statically charged hyperhurricane of abrasive, calcified dust erupts from the surface, climbing miles into the sky in seconds. The sky instantly goes pitch black, illuminated only by terrifying, jagged forks of violet lightning. I'm blind. Thalen yells from the right seat of Gold 4, his blue hands flying across the tactical board. The ash is laced with heavy metals. It's completely scrambling our active sensors. We have zero visibility. Proximity alarms are failing. Aegis reports from Gold 2, her voice strained over the sudden, violent rattling of the hull. The ash is clogging the primary intake manifolds. Engine temperature is spiking. We are losing altitude. The 4 ships are suddenly separated in a roaring, blinding storm, plummeting at terminal velocity toward a jagged city of 10,000-year-old obsidian spires they can't even see. The blind plunge. The dice roll, Gold Flight, piloting/survival. Skill varies by crew. Difficulty, Epic, 30. Navigating a blinding, engine-choking hyperstorm through an invisible alien metropolis. Gold 4. The Brawler and the Hotshot. In Gold 4, the proximity alarms finally shriek to life, a fraction of a second before a massive, jagged black spire looms out of the swirling gray ash. Thalen panics. The Andorian rookie acts on pure, aggressive instinct. Punch it. Blast through, he yells, reaching to shove the auxiliary impulse throttle to maximum. Dan O'Keefe's hand shoots out, physically grabbing Thalen's wrist and ripping it away from the console. Are you insane? Dan roars over the screaming engines. If you redline the intake in this ash, we'll melt the core in 10 seconds. We can't outrun a storm that's eating our ship. We're going to hit the spire. Thalen screams. No, we're not. Bleed the speed. Ride the thermals. Dan yanks the yoke hard to port, intentionally cutting their primary thrust. The heavy Griffin drops like a stone, slipping the aerodynamic drag just as the massive obsidian skyscraper rips past their starboard canopy, missing them by inches. Dan fights the stalling ship, his muscles straining against the heavy yoke. Stop trying to fight the planet, kid. Use the lateral thrusters. Keep us in the slipstream. Thalen, his heart hammering against his ribs, stares at the blue-collar mechanic. He finally nods, his hands flying to the lateral controls, syncing with Dan's brute force survival flying. Gold 3. Instinct and logic. In Gold 3, the situation is even worse. The electrostatic lightning has completely fried their forward deflector array. I cannot calculate a safe trajectory. Tvane reports, her Vulcan composure tested as sparks rain down on her tactical console. The metallic ash is creating ghost signatures. The computer believes we are surrounded by solid matter. Mrak doesn't look at the screen. The Kytion pilot closes her golden eyes. Turn the sensors off, Vulcan. Mrak hisses, her ears flattening against her skull. Lieutenant, that is highly illogical. We will be flying entirely blind. The machine is already blind. Mrak snarls. She grips the flight controls, her feline instincts taking over. She can feel the shift in the atmospheric pressure. She can hear the micro-variations in the wind howling against the hull as it deflects off the unseen buildings. I can smell the stone. Reroute all sensor power to the structural integrity field. Trust the pack. Tvane hesitates for exactly 1.2 seconds. Then, the Vulcan shuts down the tactical board, dumping all auxiliary power to the shields. Power rerouted. Our lives are in your hands, Lieutenant. Mrak lets out a terrifying, joyous purr, throwing Gold 3 into a violent, gut-wrenching dive, slipping perfectly between two invisible monoliths purely by the change in the air pressure. Gold 2. The anomaly. Inside Gold 2, the cockpit is flashing a furious red. Engine temperatures at critical, Aegis reports, her biological hands moving with synthetic speed over the engineering bypasses. If we do not clear this storm in 40 seconds, the impulse manifolds will fuse. Martel is fighting the yoke, his cybernetic eye whirring wildly. The red optic pulses, cutting through a fraction of the electromagnetic interference. I have a visual on the subterranean trench, Martel grunts, his scarred face tight with exertion. But the entry vector is only 40 meters wide. I have to perform a high-G localized braking maneuver, or we will shatter against the canyon wall. Aegis, I need you to manually feather the inertial dampeners to match my exact thrust. Aegis stares at the console. It requires split-second, nonverbal synchronization. Her heart rate spikes. Her core temperature rises. The illogical, undampened biological preference she feels for the cyborg pilot floods her neural net. She doesn't just calculate his flight path, she anticipates him. Martel throws the ship into a brutal 9G braking slide. Before he even completes the motion, Aegis manually drops the dampeners on the port side, allowing the ship to snap perfectly into the narrow, jagged trench without shearing the wings off. They plunge into the subterranean darkness, leaving the storm howling above them. Flawless. Martel breathes, looking back at her. Aegis looks at her trembling human hands. My synchronization with your piloting was instinctive. It defied logic. Martel smiles faintly. I told you. Keep the subroutine. The Alpha and the machine. Gold 1, the panic. Mel is wrestling Gold 1 through a nightmare. The Griffin is taking a brutal pounding, the ash scouring their ablative armor down to the bare duranium. But the ship isn't the biggest problem. In the right seat, Spanner is completely frozen. The towering Optonian, who once calculated planetary bombardments without a second thought, is experiencing his first true biological adrenaline overload. The blinding storm, the screaming alarms, the violent shaking of the cockpit, his newly synthesized human amygdala is firing a massive, unmitigated panic response. His breathing is hyperventilating. His hands are locked in a death grip on the armrests. "Spanner, I need you to clear the intake vents." Mel yells over the roar of the storm. Spanner doesn't move. The variables are too numerous. The probability of survival is dropping below 4%. I cannot process the sensory input. It is too loud. Mel looks over at him. She sees the absolute terror in his icy blue eyes. She takes one hand off the yoke. In the middle of a blinding, hyperlethal plunge toward an alien city, Mel reaches across the console and grabs Spanner by the shoulder, shaking him hard. "Spanner, look at me," Mel shouts. Spanner flinches, his eyes snapping to hers. "You aren't a computer anymore. Stop trying to calculate the storm." Mel yells, her voice carrying the absolute, unyielding authority of the Alpha. "You're a human pilot now. And humans don't survive on math. We survive because we refuse to die. Breathe." Spanner stares at her. He feels the grip of her hand on his shoulder. He feels the terrifying, chaotic surge of his own human heartbeat. He takes a massive, shuddering breath. "Clear the vents, Spanner," Mel orders, her eyes blazing with fierce, protective fire. "Be my wingman." The panic doesn't vanish, but Spanner channels it. The adrenaline that was paralyzing him suddenly becomes a weapon. His hands fly to the console, ripping the emergency purge levers. "Vents cleared," Spanner shouts, his voice raw and human. "I am routing emergency reserves to the forward deflectors. I have the trench." "Then let's go." Mel roars, slamming the throttle forward. Gold One punches through the lowest layer of the ash storm, diving into the massive, subterranean chasm just as the proximity alarms flatline. The gates of Ethelgard. The howling of the storm abruptly cuts off. The 4 Griffin scouts drop out of the swirling gray nightmare into a massive, cavernous underground cavern. The air here is still, dead, and incredibly cold. Mel eases back on the throttle, engaging the hovering thrusters. The other 3 scouts drop into formation beside her, their hulls scorched and sparking, but completely intact. Gold flight, sound off. Mel breathes, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Gold 2 online. Impulse manifolds cooling. Mattel reports. Gold 3 online. Structure holds. Mrak purrs, followed by Twain's quiet. Fascinating. Gold 4. We're in one piece. Dan sighs heavily. Good flying, Thalen. A quiet, humbled "thank you, sir," comes from the Andorian. Mel looks over at Spanner. The synthetic human leans back in his seat, wiping a line of sweat from his forehead. He lets out a breathless, exhausted laugh. "That was statistically terrifying." "Welcome to the fleet, rookie," Mel grins. Mel triggers the Griffin's forward floodlights. The massive halogen beams cut through the absolute darkness of the subterranean cavern. They illuminate a sight that hasn't been seen by living eyes in 10 millennia. Carved into the obsidian wall of the cavern are a pair of colossal, intricately designed doors, covered in the same glowing silver glyphs they saw on the ghost ship. The doors are easily 300 feet tall, and standing perfectly still in front of the doors, guarding the entrance to the Devour Swarm's control matrix, are 6 massive, towering constructs. They are identical to the glass predators they fought on the derelict, but these are easily the size of the Griffins themselves. As the halogen lights hit them, the violet energy cores deep within their jagged, crystalline chests slowly begin to pulse. "Alpha," Spanner says quietly, his hands resting on the weapons console, the panic entirely replaced by cold, focused resolve. "The vault is occupied. Lock S-foils to combat position," Mel says softly, her finger resting on the firing stud. "Let's see if 10,000-year-old glass can stop Starfleet plasma." Season 7, Episode 7, The Enemy of My Enemy. Location, Subterranean Vault Gates, Ethelgard. Time: 0830 hours. The halogen floodlights of the 4 Griffin Scouts cut through the freezing, dead air of the cavern. Standing before the 300-foot obsidian doors are the 6 colossal glass guardians. They are terrifying up close, jagged, floating monolithic statues of black glass, powered by the blinding, pulsing violet energy cores buried deep in their chests. Alpha, their electromagnetic signatures are climbing off the charts. Twain reports calmly from Gold 3, her fingers flying over the tactical sensors. They are generating a localized gravimetric distortion field. If we cross the threshold, they will crush our hulls with pure pressure. Hold the line, Gold Flight. Mel orders, gripping the yoke of Gold 1. Don't fire until they... The cavern ceiling above them suddenly groans. A massive, deafening crack echoes through the subterranean chamber. The rock above the vault shatters. For massive, heavily shielded Klingon drilling pods, launched directly from the Dura's Vorcha cruiser hovering in the storm above, smash through the cavern ceiling. They plummet to the cavern floor, sending up a massive cloud of gray, calcified ash. Before the dust even settles, the heavy ramp doors of the pods blow outward. Dozens of Dura's shock troops, clad in heavy spiked armor and carrying portable disruptor cannons, pour out into the cavern, screaming blood-curdling Klingon battle cries. Starfleet. Commander Cornyn's voice roars over an open, unencrypted frequency, broadcasting from the lead pod. The House of Duras claims this vault. Die in the dark. The three-way brawl. Break formation. Evasive. Mel screams. The cavern erupts into absolute chaos. The Duras troops immediately open fire, sending a volley of heavy green disruptor plasma screaming toward the hovering Griffin Scouts. But the Glass Guardians do not discriminate. The ancient Ethylene security systems register the Klingon as a massive, sudden biological threat. 3 of the colossal Guardians turn their eyeless, jagged heads toward the Dura's pods. A massive Guardian raises its obsidian arm. It doesn't fire a beam. It unleashes a localized wave of violent kinetic energy. The shockwave hits the nearest Klingon drilling pod and crumples the heavy duranium hull like a tin can, instantly crushing the warriors inside. The Guardians are attacking the Klingon. Spanner shouts from Gold One's right seat, his biological adrenaline spiking, but this time, he rides it. He locks onto a Dura's heavy weapons team that is taking aim at Gold 2, firing pulse cannons. Don't get caught in the crossfire. Dan yells from Gold 4, throwing the heavy scout into a brutal sideways strafe. Thalen, keep the deflectors angled toward the ceiling. The Duras are dropping thermal detonators from the upper ridges. Green Klingon plasma, orange Starfleet phasers, and violent violet kinetic shockwaves turn the cavern into a blinding, deafening meat grinder. Mrak and Twain in Gold 3 execute a flawless, synchronized strafing run. The Kytion pilot uses the massive stalagmites for cover, while the Vulcan co-pilot mathematically calculates the exact moment the Klingon disruptor fire pauses, allowing Mrak to pop out and vaporize Adura's squad trying to flank the vault doors. The shattered console. But Commander Cornyn is not a fool. He sees the Griffins tearing his troops apart, and he sees the Guardians distracted. He hoists a heavy, shoulder-mounted anti-armor disruptor cannon, locking his targeting laser directly onto the cockpit of Gold 4.
Dan. Port side.
Heavy armor-piercing lock. Aegis warns from Gold 2. I see it. Dan grunts, hauling the yoke back to throw Gold 4 into a vertical climb. He is half a second too slow. Cornyn fires. The concentrated, armor-piercing disruptor beam punches directly through Gold 4's weakened port shields, striking the heavy ablative armor right below Dan's pilot seat. The explosion is catastrophic. The entire portside primary flight console inside Gold 4 shatters. A geyser of superheated sparks, jagged shrapnel, and burning plasma erupts directly into Dan's face and chest. Dan. Thalen screams over the comms. Gold 4 violently shudders, instantly losing impulse control. The heavy scout goes into a flat spin, careening dangerously close to the cavern wall. In the right seat, Thalen unbuckles his harness, fighting the G-force of the spinning ship. He reaches over the smoking, ruined console. Dan is slumped sideways in his shock harness. The left side of his uniform is scorched black, and a massive piece of jagged console shrapnel is buried deep in his left shoulder. His face is covered in blood from a laceration across his forehead, his left eye swollen shut.
Dan.
Sir, I've got you. Thalen panics, his blue hands shaking as he tries to reach for the emergency medical kit. Dan coughs, blood spattering his lips. His right hand shoots out with terrifying, blue-collar strength, grabbing Thalen by the collar of his uniform and violently yanking the Andorian down to eye level. Leave the medkit, kid, Dan rasps, his breathing ragged, fighting through the agonizing pain in his shoulder. We're in a spin. You have to take the stick. I can't fly from the tactical seat. The primary yoke is destroyed. Thalen yells, his antennae pinned flat against his head in sheer terror. Then use the manual override on the auxiliary board. Dan grunts, his grip on Thalen's uniform tightening. Don't look at the math, Thalen.
Feel the drag.
Balance the thrusters. Do it. The Hotshots trial. Thalen stares at the bleeding, broken veteran who had spent the last 2 weeks relentlessly drilling him on how to survive a dirty fight. The panic in the Andorian's chest recedes, replaced by cold, desperate focus. Thalen drops back into the right seat. He slams his fist onto the manual override panel, transferring flight control to the smaller, far less responsive auxiliary yoke. Alpha. Gold 4 is going down. They're caught in a flat spin. Spanner reports, his voice tight. Thalen.
Pull up.
Mel screams over the channel. Thalen doesn't punch the throttle. He remembers the ash storm. He remembers Dan telling him not to fight the momentum, but to use it. Thalen watches the cavern wall rushing up to meet them.
He waits.
1 second. 2 seconds.
Now.
Dan coughs. Thalen hits the starboard lateral thrusters with a massive, controlled burst. The spin violently arrests. Gold 4 shudders, the duranium frame screaming in protest, but the scout ship stabilizes mere feet from the jagged cavern wall. I have control, Thalen yells, his hands flying across the auxiliary board. A massive glass guardian, having just crushed Adura's squad, turns its eyeless face toward the crippled Gold 4. Its violet core pulses, preparing to unleash a kinetic shockwave that will flatten the scout ship against the rock. Thalen, he's locking onto us. Dan gasps, his hand pressing hard against the shrapnel in his shoulder to stem the bleeding. Thalen's eyes narrow. He doesn't try to outrun the Guardian. He shoves the auxiliary throttle forward, flying Gold 4 aggressively toward the massive, towering glass construct. Gold 4, break off. You don't have the shields for a ramming maneuver. Twain warns from Gold 3. Thalen ignores her. He flies Gold 4 directly at the Guardian's chest. At the absolute last microsecond, Thalen kicks the rudder hard, throwing the heavy scout into a vertical slip. He flies Gold 4 directly behind the Guardian, using the ancient Ethla machine as a physical shield. Commander Cornyn, standing on the cavern floor, fires his heavy disruptor cannon at the retreating Starfleet ship. But because Thalen hid them behind the Guardian, the heavy Klingon plasma slams directly into the Guardian's back instead. The ancient machine interprets the attack as a critical threat. It turns away from Gold 4, its violet core glowing white-hot, and unleashes a devastating kinetic wave directly into Commander Cornyn's position. The Klingon commander is thrown violently backward, his armor cracking as the cavern floor erupts around him. Good flying, kid, Dan wheezes, his head slumping back against the pilot's chair as he finally lets the pain take over. Breaching the vault. The three-way battle has decimated the cavern. 4 of the 6 Guardians are shattered glass, and the Dura's boarding party is heavily crippled, pinned down behind their crushed pods. Gold 4, status. Mel demands, banking Gold 1 around a stalactite. Dan is hit. Severe trauma to his left shoulder and chest. Thalen reports, his voice shaking but his hands steady on the yoke. I have auxiliary flight control, but we are out of the fight. We need a medic. Alpha. Aegis is calm. Synthetic voice cuts through the chaos from Gold 2. The Guardian's kinetic blasts have fractured the structural integrity of the main vault doors. The glyphs are destabilizing. Mel looks at the massive, 300-foot obsidian doors. Glowing silver cracks are spreading across the monolithic surface. Matel, Mrak, concentrate all fire on the center of those doors. Mel orders. Thalen, get Dan behind the rubble and keep your head down. Gold 1, Gold 2, and Gold 3 line up in a perfect, synchronized wedge. Spanner, Aegis, and Twain lock their targeting scanners onto the exact center of the fractured glyphs. Fire. Mel roars. The 3 Griffin scouts unleash a continuous, blinding barrage of heavy rotary pulse cannons. The combined Starfleet firepower slams into the ancient obsidian. For a moment, the doors hold. And then, with a sound like a dying star, the 10,000-year-old vault of Ethelgard shatters. A shockwave of stale, freezing air rushes out of the breach, blowing the gray ash across the cavern. The vault is open, Matel breathes. Thalen, stay with Dan. Do not let those Duras scavengers near his ship. Mel orders, landing Gold 1 heavily on the cavern floor near the breached doors. The rest of Gold Flight, we're going in on foot. We find the control matrix, we burn it, and we get our boy to the Magellan sickbay. Season 7, Episode 8. The Dust and the Waves. Location: the Vault of Ethelgard. Time: 0845 hours. The air inside the 10,000-year-old vault is dead, dry, and bitterly cold. Mel, Spanner, Aegis, Matel, Mrak, and Twain step through the shattered obsidian doors, their phaser rifles raised, the beams of their shoulder lamps cutting through the pitch black. Thalen, keep the engines hot on Gold 1, 2, and 3. Mel orders over the comms. Get Dan stabilized. We aren't staying long. The vault is not a control room. It is a massive, subterranean silo. The floor drops away into a staggering, miles-deep abyss. Spanning the chasm is a narrow obsidian bridge leading to a central platform. And resting in the abyss, filling the silo like a dark, dormant ocean, are billions of tons of pale, gray ash. Alpha, Aegis whispers, her icy blue eyes scanning the abyss. That is not ash. It is the Devourer swarm. It is completely dormant, but the raw mass, it could consume a sector in days. There's the control matrix. Matel points his rifle toward a glowing silver terminal on the central platform. If we overload it, we can trigger a localized thermal cascade. We burn the swarm in its own bed. They sprint across the bridge. Mel reaches the terminal, plunging her hands into the ancient, holographic alien interface, her tactical mind racing to decode the self-destruct sequence. But they're not alone. Starfleet. Commander Cornyn, bleeding heavily from a jagged wound on his forehead, staggers out from behind a massive pillar near the vault entrance. He is followed by 5 surviving, fanatical Duras shock troops. If the House of Duras cannot wield the weapon, Cornyn snarls, raising his heavy disruptor cannon, then you will die in its tomb. Take cover. Spanner yells, shoving Mel behind the terminal just as Cornyn opens fire. The heavy green disruptor blast misses Mel by inches. But it doesn't hit the terminal. It sails past the platform and impacts the massive, dormant ocean of gray nanites below. The explosion is small. The reaction is apocalyptic. A localized electromagnetic pulse ripples through the silo. The gray ocean shudders. Energy spike. Twain shouts, her Vulcan composure breaking. The kinetic impact has triggered a localized awakening sequence. The swarm is active. Below them, a massive, swirling tidal wave of gray dust rises from the abyss. It emits a terrifying, high-frequency mechanical hiss, the sound of billions of microscopic jaws chewing through the very air. Commander Cornyn and his Duras troops freeze as the wave of nanites crests over the edge of the bridge. Kapla. Cornyn breathes, realizing his fatal error. The swarm crashes down on them. The Duras warriors don't even have time to scream. The gray dust washes over their heavy armor, calcifying the duranium, eating through the flesh, and reducing 6 Klingon warriors to literal dust in less than 3 seconds. Run! Mel roars. The swarm, hungry and completely feral, turns toward the central platform. Gold Flight sprints back across the obsidian bridge, the gray wave right on their heels. The Nanites begin to eat the bridge itself, the stone crumbling into dust beneath their boots. "We're not going to make it to Gold 4. Thalen screams over the comms from outside the vault. The cavern floor is collapsing. "Leave Gold 4. Mel orders, diving through the shattered vault doors. "Thalen, drag Dan to Gold 1.
Move.
Thalen practically carries the bleeding, half-conscious mechanic out of the crippled Gold 4, hauling him up the ramp of Gold 1 just as Mel and Spanner dive aboard. Martel and Aegis throw themselves into Gold 2, and Mrak and Twain secure Gold 3. "Punch it!" Mel yells from the pilot's seat of Gold 1, slamming the throttle forward. The 3 surviving Griffin scouts blast off the cavern floor just as the Devourer swarm erupts from the vault. The gray dust washes over the crippled, abandoned Gold 4, consuming the heavy Starfleet scout ship in seconds, leaving absolutely nothing behind. The scouts punch their impulse drives to the Red Line, rocketing up the subterranean trench and bursting back through the violent ash storm, breaking orbit and leaving the nightmare of Ethelgard behind them forever. The translation of the heart. Location: Sickbay, USS Magellan. Time: 48 hours later. The Magellan has retreated to the edge of the Beta Quadrant, hiding in the dark to lick its wounds. Admiral Quinn has received the report. The Dura's threat is neutralized, but the true horror of the Nanites is confirmed. The Alpha Quadrant savior was an ancient apocalypse. In a quiet observation room down the hall from sickbay, Aegis stands by the window. She is struggling. The near-death experience in the vault, watching Martel almost get consumed by the swarm, has pushed her biological avatar's emotional processors to the breaking point. She feels a suffocating, heavy weight in her chest, and she cannot calculate how to fix it. The doors hiss open.
Spanner walks in.
He still wears bandages on his knuckles, but his posture is much more relaxed. He has survived his first brush with human terror. "You are experiencing a data loop," Spanner says softly, standing beside her. "It is fear," Aegis admits, her voice trembling slightly. "I calculated the probability of losing Ensign Martel. The result generated a cascade of grief before the event even occurred. I do not understand how to process a phantom variable." Spanner looks at her. He understands. He lived it in the hangar bay. "Words are an inefficient data transfer for this," Spanner says. He raises his human hand. "May I?" Aegis nods. Spanner gently places his fingers against her temple, initiating a localized, synthetic neural bridge between their heuristic matrices. Aegis gasps. She doesn't receive code. She receives a feeling. Spanner shares the exact emotional algorithm he developed with Mel and Dan. He shows her that the fear of loss isn't a glitch. It is the anchor. The pain means the bond is real. It is the cost of not being alone in the dark. Aegis exhales a long, shuddering breath. The panic subsides, replaced by a profound, terrifying, but beautiful clarity. She opens her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I understand," Aegis whispers, looking at Spanner with a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, brother." The anchor. Location: Recovery Ward 3. Time: 1900 hours. The lights in Recovery Ward 3 are dimmed. Dan is lying in a bio bed, his chest and shoulder heavily bandaged, a dermal regenerator humming quietly over the worst of the shrapnel wounds. He looks pale, but the wry smile is still there. Sitting in the chair next to the bed is Sarah. She was flown out on an emergency transport from Starbase 12 the moment the Magellan reported casualties. She holds Dan's good hand in both of hers, resting her forehead against his knuckles. She has been crying, the silent, exhausted tears of a partner who lives in constant fear of the comm chime. "I'm okay, Sarah," Dan whispers, his voice raspy. "Thalen got me out. The kid can actually fly." Sarah looks up, her eyes red. "Dan, they destroyed your ship. They killed Jeklo and Anna. I sat in our quarters on the Starbase, and I watched the casualty report update, waiting to see your name." She grips his hand tighter, her voice breaking. "I am so proud of you. I am. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep waiting for the day that Mel comes back alone." Dan's smile fades. He looks at the ceiling, the bravado dropping away. He is a mechanic who became a pilot, who became a hero. But lying in the bio bed, feeling the agonizing throb in his shoulder, he realizes he isn't invincible. The war took a piece of his soul, and the piece almost took his life. "I know," Dan says softly. He turns his head to look at his wife. "I know, Sarah. I'm pushing my luck. The squad, they've got Thalen now. And Spanner. They aren't kids anymore." He squeezes her hand, his eyes filled with absolute sincerity. "When this deployment is over, I'm submitting my transfer. Back to Utopia Planitia. I want to build ships again. With you." Sarah lets out a choked sob, burying her face in his neck, wrapping her arms around him as carefully as she can. Dan holds her, burying his face in her hair. The fighting isn't entirely over, but for Dan O'Keefe, the finish line is finally in sight. Shore leave and sunburns. Location: Holodeck 4, Starbase 12. Time: 2 weeks later. The Magellan has returned. Gold Flight is officially on a mandated 2-week shore leave. To burn off the trauma of Ethelgard, the squad commandeered Holodeck 4 and booted up Risa Coastal Resort, Program 9. The holodeck is a paradise of white sand, crashing blue waves, and 2 blazing synthetic suns. Dan is lounging in a beach chair under an umbrella, his arm in a sling, sipping a replicated Mai Tai, while Sarah rubs sunscreen on his good shoulder. Martel and Mrak are engaged in a vicious, highly competitive game of beach volleyball against Thalen and Twain. And then, Mel walks out of the changing cabana. The entire squad pauses. Mel is wearing a tiny, brightly colored, incredibly light 2-piece bikini. For someone who spent a year hiding her body in oversized Starfleet sweats and baggy jackets, the transformation is staggering. She walks across the sand with absolute, radiant confidence, completely comfortable in her own skin, the Deltan pheromones naturally adjusting to the relaxed, joyful atmosphere. "Looking good, Alpha," Dan calls out, raising his glass. Mel laughs, throwing her towel onto a chair. "I finally figured out how to use the weather controls on this thing. I haven't been warm in 6 months." The holodeck doors hiss open behind them. Spanner and Aegis walk in. They are both wearing standard, perfectly pressed Starfleet duty uniforms, looking incredibly stiff and completely out of place on the tropical beach. Spanner scans the environment, his brow furrowing. The ambient temperature of the simulation is 32 degrees Celsius. The humidity is 85%. This environment is highly inefficient for biological thermoregulation while wearing Class B duranium weave uniforms. "You're supposed to change into beachwear, Spanner." Mel laughs, walking toward the water. "Relax. Get some sun." Aegis tilts her head, processing the logic. Ensign Stufel is correct. To prevent overheating and maximize simulated ultraviolet absorption, the removal of restrictive garments is the optimal choice. "Agreed," Spanner says flatly. Without a single moment of hesitation or human modesty, Spanner reaches up and unzips his Starfleet tunic, pulling it over his head. Aegis mirrors the action. Dan chokes on his Mai Tai, violently coughing. "Wait, guys, there are replicators in the cabanas," Mel starts to say, turning around. She stops dead. Spanner and Aegis haven't just removed their tunics. Because they are newly synthesized human avatars, they possess absolutely zero cultural understanding of modesty or swimwear. They strip completely, entirely naked in the middle of the beach. They stand there with perfect posture, completely unfazed, their incredibly athletic, synthetic biological bodies gleaming in the artificial sunlight. "Thermoregulation is improving," Spanner notes pleasantly, stretching his arms. Season 7, Episode 9, A Different Kind of Gravity. Location: 14th Tactical Wing Locker Room, Starbase 12. Time: 0900 hours. The locker room is quiet. The hum of the Starbase massive fusion reactors provides a steady, comforting vibration through the deck plating. Mel Stufel leans against the bulkhead, her arms crossed. She is wearing her dark, tailored flight leader jacket, watching as Dan O'Keefe empties the contents of his flight locker into a heavy canvas duffel bag. He packs his customized grav boots, his scorched flight gloves, and the battered helmet he wore during the Hive War. I knew it was coming, Mel says softly, breaking the silence. After Ethelgard, after the shrapnel. I just didn't think it would be today. Dan pauses, holding the helmet. He looks at it for a long moment, tracing a scorch mark near the visor, before placing it gently into the bag. He turns to Mel, a genuine, completely unburdened smile breaking across his face. Sarah's pregnant, Mel, Dan says. Mel's breath catches. The melancholy of losing her co-pilot instantly evaporates, completely overridden by a massive wave of absolute, pure joy. Dan, Mel laughs, pushing off the bulkhead and throwing her arms around him. Oh my God, Dan. That's incredible. You're going to be a dad. Yeah, Dan breathes, hugging her back tightly with his good arm. Yeah, I am. We found out yesterday. And sitting in the clinic with her, I realized I can't do it anymore, Mel. I can't pull 9GS and dodge disruptor fire wondering if I'm going to leave my kid an orphan. Mel steps back, her eyes shining. You don't have to explain it to me, O'Keefe. You've bled enough for this uniform. You've earned the right to stay on the ground. Dan zips up the duffel bag. I'm not going far, Alpha. Admiral Quinn approved my request. I'm officially the senior flight chief engineer for Gold Flight. I'm taking over the deck. Chief Tarl is furious, but I don't care. No one touches your griffins but me. My flying days are done, but I'm going to make damn sure you always come home. The doors to the locker room hiss open. Stepping nervously inside is a young, bright-eyed human woman. She is wearing a brand new, pristine Starfleet uniform with a single pip of an ensign on her collar. She holds a PADD tightly to her chest, looking between the legendary Deltan flight leader and the veteran mechanic. Excuse me, sirs. The young woman stammers, standing at rigid attention. Ensign Kira Vance, reporting for duty. I was told to report to Lieutenant Stufel for assignment to Gold 4. Mel looks at the rookie. She remembers exactly what it felt like to be the terrified new kid standing in the shadow of giants. Mel walks over to the rookie. She doesn't bark an order. She smiles, offering her hand. Welcome to Gold Flight, Vance, Mel says warmly. You're flying right seat with me. We have some massive boots to fill, but you're in good hands. The chief here is going to make sure our ship is the fastest thing in the quadrant. Dan grins, hoisting his duffel bag over his shoulder. Keep her flying straight, Vance. I'll see you both on the flight deck. Algorithms of affection. Location: the Promenade, Starbase 12, Level 4 Dining Concourse. Time: 1930 hours. The lights on the promenade are dimmed to a romantic, ambient glow. The high-end replicated cuisine of Le Coeur d'Or is highly sought after by Starfleet officers looking to impress. Sitting at a quiet table near the massive observation windows are Mautel and Aegis. Mautel is wearing his formal dress uniform, his cybernetic eye polished, a faint blue flush warming his scarred cheeks. Sitting across from him, Aegis is wearing an elegant, flowing civilian dress, synthesized specifically for this occasion. She sits with mathematically perfect posture, her icy blue eyes intensely focused on the replicated candle flickering in the center of the table. I have reviewed 74 terrestrial and Federation sociological texts regarding the ritual of the date, Aegis states, her voice perfectly even. The parameters are highly inefficient. We are consuming caloric sustenance we do not immediately require, in an environment optimized for low visibility, while engaging in non-tactical verbal exchanges. Mautel chuckles, taking a sip of his wine. That's the point, Aegis. It isn't a mission briefing. It's about wasting time with someone you want to waste time with. Aegis tilts her head, processing this. She picks up her fork, examining the perfectly seared piece of replicated salmon. The texts indicate I should attempt to flirt, Aegis notes, looking up at the Balian cyborg. However, the algorithms for flirtation are heavily reliant on biological deception and playful insults. I find this illogical. Therefore, I will simply state my operational status. Since you arrived at the table, my core temperature has remained elevated, and my visual sensors have deprioritized the rest of the room to focus entirely on your facial structure. Mautel's smile softens. For a cyborg who has spent years feeling disconnected from organic life, the absolute, unvarnished honesty of the Optonian avatar is the most beautiful thing he has ever heard. He reaches across the table, his duranium prosthetic hand gently resting over her synthesized biological fingers. Your operational status is perfect, Mattel says softly. Aegis looks down at their hands. Her heart rate, entirely undampened, spikes to 84 beats per minute. Mattel, Aegis whispers, her brow furrowing slightly. My internal chronometer indicates we have been sitting here for 47 minutes. I am experiencing a localized data loop. I do not want this interval to end. It doesn't have to. Mattel smiles, his thumb gently tracing her knuckles. We can sit here as long as you want. The quiet, perfect moment is suddenly interrupted by the sharp, urgent chime of Mattel's Starfleet comm badge. He sighs, tapping his chest. Mattel here. Ensign, this is Starbase Security. A frantic voice echoes over the comms. We have a code black in the detention level. The Ethelyn alien just broke containment. He ripped through a reinforced duranium bulkhead with his bare hands and is currently moving toward the civilian hangar bays. Mattel closes his eyes, dropping his head in exhaustion. Of course he is. Aegis immediately stands up, her romantic confusion instantly replaced by cold, absolute tactical readiness. The flowing civilian dress suddenly looks incredibly dangerous on her athletic frame. The biological ritual is concluded, Aegis states, her icy blue eyes locking onto the turbolifts. We must intercept the target before he secures a transport. Season 7, Episode 10, Out of Time. Location, Civilian Hangar Bay 7, Starbase 12. Time, 2015 hours. Mattel and Aegis sprint out of the turbolift, their formal wear completely at odds with the heavy phaser pistols they drew from the armory on the way down. The civilian hangar is in absolute chaos. Dock workers are scrambling for cover behind heavy cargo containers. A massive, heavily modified Antares-class civilian freighter is currently ignoring all space dock protocols, its docking clamps violently ripping free from the moorings. He's overriding the automated launch sequence. Mattel shouts over the deafening roar of the freighter's impulse engines spooling up. He bypassed the security lockout with a brute force decryption. Aegis stops at the edge of the atmospheric force field, her icy blue eyes tracking the escaping vessel as it breaches the starbase perimeter. The Ethelyn's technological comprehension is 10,000 years out of date, yet he assimilated standard Starfleet interface logic in less than 3 minutes, Aegis states, her voice perfectly, even despite the adrenaline. He is terrified. Mattel taps his comm badge. Alpha, this is Gold 2. The Ethelyn has stolen a freighter. He's breaking orbit and heading for deep space. We're already in the tubes, Mattel. Mel's voice crackles over the comms. Get to your ship. Gold flight is launching. The intercept. Location, Sector 001 perimeter. Time, 2018 hours. The 4 Griffin scouts streak out of the Starbase military bays, their impulse trails burning a bright, angry blue against the dark. Inside Gold 1, Mel grips the yoke. In the right seat, Ensign Kira Vance looks pale but remarkably focused for her first actual scramble, her hands flying over the tactical board to lock onto the fleeing freighter's ion trail. I have him on scopes, Alpha. Vance reports, her voice tight. He's pushing the Antares class past its recommended redline. He's trying to initiate a warp jump deep inside the system's gravity well. He's going to rip that old freighter apart if he engages warp here, Mel mutters, shoving her throttles forward. Open a hailing frequency. All channels. Freighter vessel, this is Starfleet Gold Flight, Mel broadcasts, her voice projecting calm, absolute authority. Cut your engines and stand down. You are overtaxing a civilian warp core. You are in extreme danger. Power down your drive. There is no verbal response, but the telemetry on Vance's board violently spikes. He isn't slowing down, Vance yells, her eyes wide. He just dumped the safeties on the antimatter containment field. He's trying to force the injection sequence to generate more thrust. Alpha. The matter-antimatter ratio is completely destabilizing. Tvena's voice cuts in from Gold 3. The Ethelyn does not understand modern warp mechanics. He is attempting to channel raw plasma directly into the warp coils like a geothermal drive. Break off. Mel screams, yanking her yoke hard to starboard. Gold flight, scatter. Max shields, going thermal. They are a fraction of a second too late to stop him, but just fast enough to survive. The Antares-class freighter doesn't jump to warp. The ancient alien, desperate to escape the nightmare of the Devourer swarm and the galaxy that wielded it, pushes a 24th century engine with 10,000-year-old logic. The magnetic containment field completely collapses. The freighter goes thermal. It vanishes in a blinding, silent sphere of pure, expanding white light. The shockwave hits Gold Flight like a physical hammer. The Griffins are violently tossed through the void, their heavy ablative armor scorching under the intense wave of ambient radiation. Mel wrestles Gold One into a stabilized drift, the alarms in the cockpit screaming. Beside her, Vance is gripping the edges of her console, her breathing heavy but completely unharmed. The light fades. Where the massive civilian freighter had been, there is nothing but an expanding cloud of superheated plasma, vaporized uranium, and empty space. Gold flights sound off. Mel breathes, her heart pounding. One by one, the squad checks in. Scorched shields, rattled teeth, but no casualties. They drift in the silent debris field. The ancient survivor, who woke up 10 millennia too late only to find his apocalypse waiting for him, is gone. The anatomy of an accident. Location: Hangar Bay 4, Starbase 12. Time: 0200 hours. The hangar bay is quiet. The surviving debris from the Antares freighter has been tractor-beamed into a containment field for analysis. Dan O'Keefe is in his element. The newly minted senior flight chief engineer is wearing a grease-stained Starfleet undershirt, walking around the charred fragments of the warp manifold with a heavy diagnostic tricord. Mel, Aegis, Mottel, and Spanner stand near the perimeter, watching him work. Are we absolutely sure this wasn't Section 31? Mel asks, her arms crossed, the old paranoia of the Shadow War creeping back in. Or Dura's loyalists hiding on the station. Could they have sabotaged the freighter so he couldn't talk? Dan finishes his scan, shaking his head. He walks over to the squad, tossing a charred piece of EPS conduit onto a nearby crate. I've run the telemetry through the Griffin sensor logs 3 times, Mel. Dan sighs, wiping his forehead with a rag. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't sabotage. It was pure, tragic pilot error. Dan taps his PADD, projecting a small hologram of the freighter's engine core. Look at the command logs from the helm, Dan explains, pointing to the glowing red text. He bypassed the safety interlocks perfectly. But when he went to engage the warp drive, he manually adjusted the intermix ratio. He pumped a 90% matter to 10% antimatter stream directly into the primary injector. Spanner's icy blue human eyes narrow as he processes the math. That mixture would completely fail to generate a stable warp bubble. It would simply flood the chamber with superheated raw plasma until the structural integrity of the casing failed. Exactly. Dan nods heavily. His people used geothermal decay drives. He saw a glowing power source and assumed it worked the same way. He poured gasoline on a fusion reaction thinking it would make it go faster. Aegis looks at the charred wreckage. The romantic evening with Mottel feels like a lifetime ago. He awoke to a galaxy he did not understand, Aegis says softly, her voice carrying a profound, newly discovered human empathy. And his fear of the swarm drove him to run before he could learn. Mel stares at the debris, letting out a long, slow breath. The Ethelyn was the last living link to the true history of the Devourer swarm. Without him, the origins of the Optonians and the ancient weapon that saved Earth remain buried in the ash of Ethelgard. Bag it up, Chief, Mel says quietly. Write the report. It's over. Dan nods, turning back to his deck crews. You got it, Alpha. Mel looks at her squad. The bizarre, broken, and beautiful family they've built out of the ashes of a dozen different tragedies. Get some sleep, Gold Flight. Mel orders gently. Tomorrow, we get back to the frontier. The Ethelyns are gone, but we're still here. And there's a lot of dark out there left to map. Season 7, Episode 11, The Photonic City. Location: Uncharted System, Beta Quadrant. Time: 1,000 hours. The USS Magellan holds a high orbit above a stunning, Earth-like Class M planet. Swirling blue oceans and lush green continents dominate the view screen, but the atmosphere is wrapped in a shimmering, aurora-like spatial anomaly that scatters standard Starfleet sensors. Down in the massive hangar bay of the science cruiser, Chief Dan O'Keefe is standing at the primary tactical oversight console, a steaming mug of replicated coffee in his hand. He isn't wearing a flight suit anymore, just standard engineering fatigues, but his eyes are locked on the telemetry. "I'm punching through the atmospheric interference, Alpha," Dan says over the comms, his fingers dancing across the board. "I've got a massive, continuous power signature radiating from the northern hemisphere. It's a city, a big one. The architecture matches a mid-21st century terrestrial civilization." "Understood, Chief." Mel Stuffel's voice replies from the cockpit of Gold One. "What's the biological head count?" Dan frowns, tapping the display screen. He runs the scan again. "That's the weird part, Mel. The power grid is lighting up like a Christmas tree, and visual telemetry shows thousands of moving vehicles and thermal shapes, but the biological scan is flatlining. Zero life signs. The planet is entirely empty." "Fascinating." Twain's monotone voice chimes in from Gold 3, a fully automated, functioning metropolis devoid of organic life. Perhaps a post-extinction mechanized society. "Only one way to find out," Mel says. "Gold Flight, lock S-foils for atmospheric entry. Let's go take a walk." The surreal touchdown. The 4 Griffin scouts cut through the shimmering atmospheric anomaly, dropping out of the clouds over a sprawling, magnificent metropolis. It looks incredibly peaceful. Glass and steel skyscrapers gleam in the alien sun. Paved roads are filled with wheeled, combustion-style vehicles. Mel guides Gold Flight down toward a massive, manicured green park in the center of the city. As the 4 heavily armed Starfleet tactical scouts flare their impulse engines and touch down on the grass, Mel braces for a panic. Standard pre-warp civilizations usually initiate mass hysteria when alien warships land in their public parks. "Vance, keep the shields up, but power down the weapons," Mel orders her new co-pilot. "We don't want to spook them, Alpha." Ensign Vance whispers, staring out the canopy. "Look at them." Mel looks. People are walking their dogs on the paved paths. Families are having picnics on the grass. Businessmen in sharp suits are jogging past. And absolutely none of them are screaming. A man walking a golden retriever casually steps around the massive, scorching hot landing strut of Gold 2, doesn't even break his stride, and gives Mottel and Aegis a polite, neighborly wave through the cockpit glass. "What in the name of the prophets is going on?" Thalen mutters from Gold 4. "They're acting like a Starfleet landing party is a completely normal weather event." "Masks on," Mel orders, popping the seal on her canopy. "Let's figure out why our scanners are broken." Ghosts in the daylight. Gold Flight steps out onto the grass. The air is warm and smells faintly of ozone and cut grass. Mottel sweeps the park with his tricorder, his cybernetic eye whirring. A young woman jogging in a tracksuit accidentally bumps directly into his shoulder. "Oh, excuse me. Have a great day," she smiles warmly, jogging away. Mottel stares at his tricorder.
Alpha.
The tricorder registers absolutely nothing. No carbon, no cellular structure, no heat signature. According to the sensors, that woman does not exist. "I just bumped into empty air." Spanner and Aegis step forward. The 2 Optonian avatars close their eyes, syncing their synthetic biological senses to the ambient electromagnetic frequencies of the planet. "It is not a sensor malfunction," Aegis states, opening her icy blue eyes. "They are not biological. They are highly complex, multi-layered photonic projections. Holograms." "The entire planet is a holodeck?" Mrak hisses, her tail swishing in absolute bewilderment. "Who built it? And why are they ignoring us?" Vance asks. Spanner walks over to a nearby park bench and runs his hand along the metal. The parameters of their behavioral matrix are highly rigid. It appears their programming simply lacks the variable for alien spaceships. When faced with an input they cannot compute, their subroutine defaults to casual acceptance to prevent a cascading logic failure. So they're NPCs, Mel realizes, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. We just landed in the middle of a planetary simulation. Alpha, I am detecting a localized degradation in the primary containment field, Twain reports, pointing her tricorder toward the center of the city. The holograms are beginning to lose their tactile cohesion. That is why they do not register on standard scans. The system's force field generators are failing. If the degradation continues, this entire city, and everyone in it, will simply fade to static. Mel taps her comm badge. Dan, are you hearing this? Loud and clear, Mel. Dan's voice replies, the chief engineer already sounding excited by the puzzle. If it's a failing holomatrix, there has to be a central processing core. I'm tracking the heaviest power convergence to a large civic building about 2 clicks north of your position. Get in there, find the mainframe, and let's see if we can plug this leak. Gold Flight jogs through the bustling, oblivious city streets, finally arriving at a massive, dome-shaped building that the holograms seem to treat as a library. Inside, they find the illusion drops away. The center of the building houses a massive, humming column of crystal and metal, the planetary computer core. But the crystals are visibly fracturing, leaking raw, erratic photonic energy. The primary cooling manifolds are misaligned, Twain observes, immediately moving to a physical access panel. The system has been running autonomously for over 6 centuries. It is simply wearing out. Dan, we're at the core, Mel says, standing guard with Mrak and Thalen at the doors. What's the play? All right, let's play doctor. Dan broadcasts through the squad's comms, looking at the telemetry spanner is feeding him. Aegis, the alien architecture uses a tricyclic power flow. It's similar to an Optonian plasma relay. Can you bridge their secondary power buffer using a Starfleet EPS tap? Affirmative, Chief, Aegis says. She pulls a heavy engineering kit from her belt, moving with mathematical precision. She begins physically hardwiring Starfleet cables into the alien crystal matrix. However, the data stream is fragmenting. We must stabilize the heuristic loop before we re-engage the power, or the sudden surge will wipe their memory banks entirely. I will stabilize the data stream, Spanner says. He doesn't use a tricorder. The synthetic human steps up to the glowing crystal core and places his bare hands directly onto the conductive surface, initiating a localized, physical neural link with the planetary computer. Spanner's eyes flare with bright blue light. He acts as a living bridge, using his massive Optonian processing power to hold the crumbling alien code together while Twain and Aegis physically rebuild the hardware. Core temperature is dropping, Mottel reports, watching the readouts. Dan, the Starfleet patch is holding. We are ready to reinitialize the spatial cohesion field. Do it, Dan confirms. Aegis throws the heavy physical bypass switch she just installed. A massive, silent pulse of blue energy ripples out from the building, washing over the entire city. Out on the street, the flickering holograms suddenly snap into perfect, high-definition focus. Mottel sweeps his tricorder over the doors. It worked. I'm reading full tactile feedback and mass density. They are fully rendered again. The architect's legacy. Spanner breaks his physical connection with the core, stumbling backwards slightly. Mel catches his arm to steady him. You okay, Spanner? Mel asks. What did you see in there? Spanner looks at the glowing, stabilized crystal core. The awe in his icy blue eyes is profoundly human. I saw their history, Spanner whispers. They are not an experiment, Alpha. 600 years ago, a biological plague swept this world. As their population died, their brightest scientists constructed this matrix. They scanned the neural patterns of every surviving citizen and uploaded them into the simulation. Twain raises an eyebrow. A digital arc, a method of achieving immortality to outlast an extinction-level event. Yes, Spanner nods. The simulation is set to run until the planet's ecosystem naturally cleanses itself of the pathogen. Once the surface is habitable again, The computer is programmed to synthesize biological bodies and download them back into the physical world. They're just waiting for the rain to stop, Vance says softly, looking out the window at the people walking in the park. Mel looks around the room. They didn't fire a single phaser. They didn't fight a single warship. They just used wrenches, code, and empathy to save an entire civilization from fading into the dark. Dan, Mel says, tapping her badge, a warm, genuine smile on her face. Tell the Magellan we're done here. The ghosts are safe. Copy that, Alpha, Dan's voice replies, filled with quiet pride. I'll have a hot meal waiting for you in the mess hall when you get back. Mel turns to her squad. The bizarre mix of veterans, rookies, and sentient machines. They work. They really work. Let's go home. Gold Flight, Mel orders. Season 7, Episode 12, The Ghosts of the Dominion. Location: Desolate Moon, Theta Scorpii System. Time: 0400 hours. The USS Magellan is holding position in deep space when the comms console on the flight deck starts spitting out a fragmented, agonizingly old string of code. Dan O'Keefe stares at his monitor, his coffee forgotten on the desk. He runs the decryption algorithm 3 times, refusing to believe the readout. He taps his comm badge. Alpha, you need to get up here. I've got a distress signal. Mel walks onto the flight deck a minute later, still zipping up her duty jacket. What is it, Chief? A civilian transport. No, Dan says, his voice thick with disbelief. It's Starfleet. But the encryption protocol. Mel, this code was retired 30 years ago. It's a subspace SOS from the USS Ardent. They went MIA during the Dominion War. They were presumed destroyed at the Battle of Tyra in 2374. Mel stares at the screen. That's impossible. That was a slaughter. Are you sure it isn't an automated beacon? It has a live biotelemetry ping, Dan says, looking up at her. There are Starfleet officers alive on that moon, Mel. They've been waiting for a rescue for 3 decades. Wake the squad, Mel orders softly. We're bringing them home. The wreck of the Ardent. The 4 Griffin scouts drop through the thin, freezing atmosphere of a rocky, completely barren moon. Nestled inside a massive crater is the USS Ardent. It is an Akira-class heavy cruiser, but it looks like a corpse. The hull is scorched, the nacelles are dark, and the Starfleet pennant is barely visible under decades of frozen dust. But deep within the saucer section, a faint, flickering yellow light indicates auxiliary life support is still barely functioning. Gold Flight sets down in the dust. They don't draw their weapons. They carry emergency medical kits, thermal blankets, and field rations. Gold Flight, stay sharp, but keep your posture non-threatening, Mel orders as they approach the massive, manually pried open airlock. These people have been marooned since before some of you were born. They step into the dark, freezing corridors of the Ardent. The air is stale, smelling of ozone, sweat, and despair. As they round the corner toward the main mess hall, the beams of their shoulder lamps hit a barricade of torn deck plating. Halt. The voice is raspy, entirely devoid of hope, and hard as duranium. Rising from behind the barricade are 6 figures. They are wearing ragged, stitched-together remnants of the old, gray-shouldered Dominion War-era Starfleet uniforms. They look starved, their faces gaunt, their eyes burning with a terrifying, paranoid intensity. They are holding heavily modified, stripped-down phaser rifles. And the rifles are aimed directly at Mel's chest. The war that never ended. Stand down, Starfleet, Mel says, keeping her voice incredibly calm, holding her hands up to show the medical kit. I am Lieutenant Mel Stufel, 14th Tactical Wing. We received your beacon. The war is over. We're here to take you home. The leader of the survivors steps forward. His uniform bears the faded pips of a captain. His hair is completely white, his face scarred. Captain Elias Thorne. Thorne doesn't lower his rifle. His eyes dart frantically over Gold Flight. He looks at Mottel's cybernetic face. He looks at Spanner and Aegis, whose absolute physical perfection immediately triggers his paranoia. And he looks at Mel, an unbonded Deltan wearing a skirt variant uniform. The war is over? Thorn sneers, his voice trembling with manic rage. You think I'm a fool? You think we haven't seen this trick before, shapeshifter? Captain, please. Twain steps forward, her hands open. Logic dictates. Shut up, Vorta. Thorn screams, the phaser whining as it fully charges. I know what you are. You wear our faces, you replicate our badges, but you aren't Starfleet. Starfleet doesn't build synthetics. Starfleet doesn't recruit Borg, he yells, pointing at Mottel. Captain Thorn, look at my telemetry, Mel pleads, taking a slow step forward. Tap into our ship's databanks. The Dominion surrendered 30 years ago. Earth is safe. Liar. Thorn roars. He gestures behind him. In the corner of the mess hall, huddled in absolute terror, are a dozen native Beta Quadrant civilians, simple miners from a nearby settlement. They are bound, gagged, and bruised. They landed a scout ship 3 days ago. Thorn breathes, his eyes wide with madness. Founders. Trying to infiltrate our perimeter. But we caught them. And now they've sent you to execute us. Those are innocent civilians, Captain. Vance cries out, stepping out from behind Dan's old pilot. They don't even know what the Dominion is. They're the enemy. Thorn yells. He turns to his ragged, starving crew. If we die today, we take the Founders with us. For the Federation, execute the prisoners. The impossible order. The ragged Starfleet crew raises their rifles, taking aim at the terrified, bound civilians. Time slows down. Mel stares at Captain Thorn. She sees the madness, the starvation, and the absolute, unwavering belief that he is doing the right thing. He is a hero in his own mind, fighting a war that ended 30 years ago. He is completely, irreparably broken. If she does nothing, 12 innocent people will be vaporized. If she acts, she fires on the uniform she swore to protect. Alpha. Spanner whispers over the internal comlink, his synthetic heart breaking as his human eyes process the sheer tragedy of the moment. They're going to fire. Mel's jaw tightens. A single tear slips down her cheek. She draws her Type 3 phaser. Gold flight, Mel whispers, her voice cracking. Lethal force authorized. Fire. The dice roll, gold flight. Blasters/empathy. Skill varies. Difficulty, tragic. Automatic success on hit, but the narrative cost is absolute. The dark corridor erupts into blinding orange light. It is not a battle. It is an execution. Gold Flight is fully fed, heavily armed, and perfectly synchronized. The Arden survivors are starving, exhausted, and using 30-year-old, jury-rigged weapons. Mottel drops the 2 guards on the left with a double tap. Mrak leaps the barricade, her phaser stunning one before her momentum carries her into another, pinning him to the deck. Captain Thorn turns his rifle back to Mel, screaming in defiance. Mel fires. The heavy phaser blast hits Thorn square in the chest. The old captain is thrown backward against the bulkhead. He slides to the frozen deck plating, his modified rifle clattering uselessly away. In less than 5 seconds, it is over. The mess hall falls dead silent, save for the weeping of the bound civilians. The weight of the badge. Mel lowers her phaser. Her hands are shaking violently. She walks over to the barricade. Captain Thorn is gasping for air, the stun setting completely overwhelming his frail, starved heart, pushing him into fatal cardiac arrest. Mel drops to her knees next to him. She doesn't reach for her medical kit. She knows it's too late. Thorn looks up at her, his vision fading. The madness in his eyes slowly clears, replaced by the profound, terrifying clarity of a dying man. He looks at the modern Starfleet comm badge on her jacket. He looks at the tears on her face. You, Thorn whispers, blood on his lips. You really are Starfleet. I am, Mel chokes out, gently taking the old man's hand. We won, Captain. The Federation survived.
You did your job.
Thorn lets out a long, ragged exhale. Thank God. His eyes glaze over. The captain of the USS Ardent is gone. Behind her, Vance is quietly weeping, helping to untie the civilian miners. Twain stands perfectly still, staring at her phaser, unable to process the profound lack of logic in a universe that allows this to happen. Spanner drops his weapon. The Optonian avatar falls to his knees, burying his face in his biological hands. The empathy algorithm he so desperately wanted to understand is completely crushing him.
Why?
Spanner sobs, his shoulders shaking. He was not an enemy. He was just broken. Why did the math force us to kill him? Aegis kneels beside Spanner, wrapping her arms around him, her own icy blue eyes brimming with tears. Because the math is cruel, brother, she whispers. Because if we did not break our own hearts, the innocent would have died. The silent ride home. Location: flight deck, USS Magellan. Time: 12 hours later. The bodies of the ardent crew have been secured in the morgue, draped in Federation flags. The civilian miners were treated and returned to their settlement. Dan O'Keefe is sitting alone at the tactical console on the Magellan. The flight deck is dark. The doors hiss open. Mel walks in. She looks completely hollowed out. She walks over to the console and slumps into the chair next to Dan, staring blankly at the dormant screens. Dan doesn't say anything. He reaches out and rests his heavy, calloused hand on the back of her neck, offering the only silent comfort he has. I killed a Starfleet captain today, Dan, Mel whispers into the dark. A man who held the line against the Dominion while I was still a kid on Earth. He spent 30 years in the dark, waiting for us to come. And when we finally did, I shot him. You saved 12 innocent people, Mel, Dan says softly. Thorne was gone long before you pulled that trigger. The war killed him. It just took 30 years for his body to catch up. It doesn't feel like a save, Mel says, her voice breaking. She leans into Dan's hand, finally letting the exhaustion and the profound, agonizing guilt wash over her. It feels like we just executed a ghost. Dan pulls a chair over, sitting close to his flight leader, his friend. That's the job, Alpha, Dan whispers, his own voice thick with emotion. We carry the ghosts, so the people sleeping back on Earth don't have to. Out the massive observation windows, the Beta Quadrant stretches out before them. Endless, dark, and utterly unforgiving. Season 7, Episode 13, The Weight of the Pips, Part 1. Location: Judge Advocate General, JAG, Chambers, Starbase 12. Time: 3 weeks later. The Beta Quadrant expedition is halted. The USS Magellan remains docked. Gold Flight has been pulled off the line and stripped of their sidearms. They are not heroes today. They are the subjects of a Class 1 board of inquiry. The JAG hearing room is a cold, sterile amphitheater of polished duranium and dark wood. Sitting behind the high bench are 3 Starfleet admirals. Sitting alone at the center table, wearing a perfectly pressed dress uniform, is Lieutenant Mel Stufel. She has been sitting there for 6 hours. The admirals aren't asking about the Devourer swarm. They aren't asking about Ethelgard. They are surgically, relentlessly dissecting her decision to fire on a decorated Starfleet captain. Lieutenant Stufel, Admiral Vance, a stern, gray-haired man, says, peering over his glasses. Captain Thorne was a prisoner of war for 30 years. He was suffering from severe psychological trauma. Your orders were to rescue him, not execute him. Did you exhaust all diplomatic avenues before authorizing lethal force? He was 5 seconds away from vaporizing 12 civilian miners, Admiral, Mel answers, her voice completely steady, though her hands are tightly clasped under the table to hide their shaking. There was no diplomacy left. That is a subjective tactical assessment, Vance counters coldly. We need to understand your state of mind. We need to know if the flight leader of Gold Flight has become too quick to pull the trigger. The doors open. The admirals begin calling the squad in one by one. Mel is forced to sit in silence and listen as her family is interrogated about her fitness to command. The testimonies. Chief Dan O'Keefe. Dan stands at attention, his arm no longer in a sling, wearing his chief engineer's uniform. He glares up at the bench. You want to know about her command decisions? Dan asks, his voice practically a growl. Mel Stufel didn't ask to be flight leader. She took the seat because Anna Shvetsov died holding a door, so we could live. Mel kept this squad together when half of us were bleeding out on an alien rock. She doesn't pull the trigger because she wants to, Admiral. She pulls it so the rest of us don't have to carry the ghost. Ensign Thalen and Lieutenant Vane, the rookies, stand side by side. Lieutenant Stuffel's actions were perfectly logical, Tvane states with absolute Vulcan certainty. The variables were a Starfleet officer experiencing terminal psychotic divergence versus 12 innocent biologicals. The utilitarian calculation dictates the preservation of the 12. Thalen's antennae flatten against a skull. She's the best alpha in the fleet. When my console blew up and Dan was bleeding to death, she didn't panic. She guided me through a flat spin in a subterranean cavern. If you ground her, you might as well ground all of us. Ensign Martel and Lieutenant Mrak, the Balian cyborg and the Kytion pilot, refuse to stand at the podium. They stand directly behind Mel's chair, a silent, physical show of the pack's loyalty. She is the alpha. Mrak hisses softly, glaring at the admirals. A true leader does not flinch when the hunt turns dark. She protected the flock. Do not question her claws when you sent her into the briar patch. The absolute record. The admirals are unmoved. The testimonies are passionate, but they are from a fiercely loyal squad. They need objective proof that the execution was unavoidable. We appreciate the loyalty of your pilots, Lieutenant, Admiral Vance says, shuffling his pads. But Starfleet cannot run on sentiment. We have the audio logs, but in the chaos of a firefight, voices overlap. We cannot definitively prove Thorn was going to fire on those civilians before you fired on him. The heavy doors to the chamber hiss open one last time. Spanner and Aegis walk in. The two Optonian avatars wear their Starfleet dress uniforms with mathematically flawless precision. They step up to the podium. Admirals, Spanner says, his icy blue eyes locking onto the bench. You require objective proof of the tactical reality aboard the USS Ardent. We do, Ensign, Vance nods. Biological memory is subjective. It degrades under adrenaline and trauma, Aegis states. Our memory does not. Aegis and Spanner do not hand over a datapad. They step forward, their eyes suddenly flaring with blinding, piercing blue light. They interface directly with the JAG chamber's massive holographic projector. The sterile courtroom vanishes. Suddenly, the admirals are sitting in the freezing, dark mess hall of the Ardent. The projection is a flawless 1:1 scale, unedited, high-definition visual and audio recording pulled directly from the Optonians' optical sensors. The admirals watch the scene play out exactly as it happened. They see the madness in Thorn's eyes. They hear the terrifying whine of his modified phaser rifle fully charging. They see the 12 civilian miners weeping on the floor. The projection zooms in, analyzing the microscopic muscle twitches in Thorn's finger as it begins to depress the trigger. The data overlay appears in the air, time to civilian vaporization, 0.4 seconds. And then the admirals see Mel. They see her lower her weapon, the absolute agony on her face, as she realizes the diplomatic window has closed. They see the tear fall. And they see her fire, a fraction of a second before Thorn can execute the miners. The projection cuts out. The courtroom returns to normal. The chamber is dead silent. The admirals stare at the empty air, where the ghost of Captain Thorn just died again. The exoneration. Admiral Vance clears his throat, looking down at his desk. He looks older suddenly. The evidence is irrefutable, Vance says quietly. He stands up, and the other two admirals follow suit. Lieutenant Stuffel, Vance says, his voice losing its interrogator's edge, replaced by the heavy, somber respect of a veteran. The Board of Inquiry finds that your actions aboard the USS Ardent were justified, necessary, and completely within the parameters of Starfleet rules of engagement. You are exonerated of all charges. Your sidearm and your flight status are fully restored. Vance looks at the squad standing behind her. You made an impossible call, Mel, the Admiral says softly. Starfleet is sorry we put you in a position where you had to make it.
Dismissed.
Mel stands up. She doesn't smile. The exoneration clears her record, but it doesn't wash the memory out of her head. She turns around. Dan, Spanner, Aegis, Martel, Mrak, Thalen, and Vance are all standing there, waiting for her. Let's get out of here, Mel whispers. Dan puts a heavy arm around her shoulder, leading the flight leader out of the courtroom and back out into the light of the starbase. Location: Counseling Annex, Starbase 12. Time: 1 week later. The room doesn't look like a Starfleet facility. There are no LCARS displays, no tactical tables, and the lighting is a warm, soft amber. Gold Flight is sitting in a wide circle of comfortable chairs. They are in civilian clothes, looking incredibly out of their element. Sitting across from them is Commander Trina, a Betazoid Starfleet counselor with a calm, deeply empathetic presence. "You survived an impossible situation," Trina says softly, looking around the circle. But survival is not the same as recovery. Starfleet tactical wings have a historic tendency to bury their trauma under bravado. We are not doing that today. For the first 20 minutes, the silence is deafening. Dan crosses his arms, staring at the floor. Mraka's tail twitches irritably against the side of her chair. Twain sits with her eyes closed, meditating to avoid the uncomfortable emotional static in the room. Finally, it is Ensign Vance who breaks. The rookie co-pilot rubs her face, taking a shaky breath. "I still hear the phaser blast," Vance whispers, her voice trembling. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Captain Thorne sliding down the bulkhead." The dam breaks. Once the rookie speaks, the veterans step in to carry the weight. Dan talks about the terror of watching the shrapnel tear through his console, knowing he was leaving Sarah alone. Mrak admits that the loss of Anna and Jeklo makes her feel like a lone hunter without a pack. Mel sits quietly, listening to her squad bleed out their fears in the safety of the amber room. She speaks last, unburdening the crushing guilt of pulling the trigger on a fellow officer. Trina doesn't offer magical cures. She offers tools. "This is not a one-time fix," the counselor states as the session finally winds down. "Pain does not simply vanish because you named it. As long as Gold Flight operates out of this starbase, mandatory debriefings will occur in this room after every major deployment. You will not carry the dark alone." The Synthetic Heart. Location: the Promenade. Time: 1,400 hours. The squad disperses after the session, required to take the rest of the day for personal reflection. Mel is walking toward the turbolifts when she spots Martel and Aegis standing near the massive observation windows, looking out at the Magellan. Mel stops, a quiet, amazed smile touching her lips. Aegis is not wearing the standard, rigid Starfleet trousers she replicated when she first synthesized her biological avatar. She is wearing the skirt variant uniform, paired with sheer dark tights and knee-high boots, an exact reflection of Mel's own uniform choice. Aegis shifts her weight, her posture completely relaxed, leaning slightly against the railing. She is laughing, a genuine, warm, fully human laugh, at something Martel just said. The Balian cyborg is looking at her with absolute, undisguised adoration, his duranium hand resting gently on her waist. Spanner walks up to the railing a moment later, holding 2 replicated coffees. He hands one to Aegis, clapping Martel on the shoulder with a casual, easy familiarity. Spanner's posture, his cadence, the way he smiles, the terrifying, cold logic of the Optonian warship is entirely gone. He is just a man standing with his friends. Mel watches them, leaning against the bulkhead. She notices something profound. Dan is still carrying the phantom pain in his shoulder. Mel is still carrying the ghost of the Ardent. But Aegis and Spanner, their eyes are clear. They learned how to feel, but because their underlying heuristic matrices process data so efficiently, they also learned how to heal. They don't trap their trauma in endless biological feedback loops of guilt and anxiety. They experience the emotion, they understand its origin, they catalog the lesson, and they move forward. They are the most human people on the station, but they heal like gods. Mel smiles, deeply grateful that her wingmen have found peace. Her comm badge suddenly chirps. "Admiral Quinn to Lieutenant Stufel. Report to my ready room immediately." The Alpha Stars. Location: Admiral Quinn's ready room. Time: 1,430 hours. Mel's stomach drops. The tribunal exonerated her, but Starfleet Command is notoriously fickle. She steps out of the turbolift, tugging nervously at the hem of her jacket, her Deltan pheromones spiking with anxiety. She walks into the ready room and snaps to attention. Lieutenant Stufel reporting as ordered, Admiral. Quinn is standing by his desk. He doesn't look angry. He looks tired, but immensely proud. At ease, Mel, Quinn says, gesturing for her to sit. Mel slowly takes the chair opposite the desk. The JAG tribunal was a circus, Quinn states bluntly, sitting down. They look at data pads and casualty reports. They don't look at the people pulling the triggers. But I do. Quinn opens a small, velvet-lined box on his desk. The 14th Tactical Wing has been operating with a battlefield command structure since the Hive War began, Quinn says, looking her in the eye. You took the Alpha seat because you had to. You held this squad together through a Black Ops Shadow War, a Nanite apocalypse, the loss of your flight leader, and Adura's ambush. And yesterday, you sat in a chair and took the absolute worst of Starfleet's bureaucracy on the chin to protect your pilots. Quinn slides the box across the desk. I don't need a lieutenant holding the line on the frontier, Quinn says, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his stern face. I need a commander. Mel stares at the box. Resting on the velvet are the 2.5 gold pips of a Starfleet lieutenant commander. Mel's breath hitches. Her hands tremble slightly as she reaches out and touches the cold metal of the rank insignia. She thinks of Anna, who never got to wear these. She thinks of Dan, who traded his yoke for a wrench to keep her flying. She thinks of the terrified Deltan recruit she used to be, hiding in baggy sweatpants, entirely afraid of the universe. That girl is gone. Admiral, Mel whispers, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep them flying, Commander Stufel, Quinn replies, standing up and extending his hand. Congratulations. Mel stands, her posture perfect, her shoulders squared with the absolute, unyielding confidence of a true alpha. She takes the Admiral's hand in a firm, iron grip. I'll keep them flying, sir. You have my word.